Members, may I remind you, when the House rose, the question and debate was that the Appropriation Bill 2018-2019 be read a second time. Honorable Member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister commenced his presentation on page 3 with an expression of sorrow for the devastating fire at the FRC. And I could not help but wonder if that is not the same Prime Minister who said our patrimony is measured by our credit rating. That is the same Prime Minister who had no regard for the St. Lucia National Trust and the importance of its work. But, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, so it goes. Mr. Speaker, it was the Roman philosopher Seneca, and later adopted by Oprah Winfrey, who stated that luck is when opportunity meets preparation. The SLP government, which assumed office in 2011, had to rebuild St. Lucia in the context of a declining world economy and an economy that was in economic crisis. So the hard work and preparation had to be done. Difficult decisions had to be taken. It included implementing VAT, cutting back on expenditure, and reducing the deficit. All of those actions in a world facing an economic crisis. But it was preparation for the future, for the opportunities that would come once the world economy improved. But in a democracy, you pay the price for unpopular decisions. And so did the SLP, who lost the 2016 elections. However, the preparation was almost completed. It was a matter of opportunity for takeoff to take place. Before that defeat, the member for Beaufort South launched a well-designed CIP and signed MOUs for 4 hotel projects, 3 of them to be built in the South. So the South would be given a particular focus. The member announced that we'll be increasing our bed stock by 2,000 beds, something which is shouted about these days as if it is so novel. But Mr. Speaker, last year, I said that the budget was a blueprint for building a better St. Lucia. It was premised on the actions and the statements of the government in the budget. This budget sees a reinforcement of that approach. Page 3 of the budget address delivered last night states that this is a policy statement that lay bare the areas, and I quote, identified as the next steps towards the ultimate goal of poverty eradication and shared prosperity. And I ask myself, poverty eradication and shared prosperity? From the other side, who is fooling who? On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, this government is continuing to build a better St. Lucia. I am convinced of it. When the PM states in his budget address that there will be no subsidies under the guise of helping out the poor, and every member opposite applauds that, I know we are building a better St. Lucia. When a government minister responsible for social justice can boast that the nice workers were fired because it was not 80% that were SLP supporters, but 95%. I am convinced that a better St. Lucia is being built. When another government minister can boast in his worst accent that he closed down RSL because there were too many political hacks there, then I am convinced that they are building a bitter St. Lucia. I am convinced that they are building a bitter St. Lucia when the government, having terminated the laptop program, denying all children a chance to learn and use technology, then donates the same computers to a private school. I know we are building a bitter St. Lucia when the government refuses to reinstate the distress fund for families who suffer from house fires. Mr. Speaker, I know that we are building a bitter St. Lucia when you have the holders of the highest office of this land so bent on personal, institutional, and organizational victimization. I know from personal experience. This attitude, this disdain for St. Lucians, this wanton victimization is what I am referring to as a bitter St. Lucia. There is a toxic feeling in this country. I have stated that the government has no bonds in its abuse of power.
You mistake bitter for better.
It is clear to all St. Lucians that they will do anything to silence me, to break me, to discredit me. If the vicious attack on me was supposed to get me scared and run to hide for shelter, then they don't know me. Mr. Speaker, I don't know how to give up. I don't know how to give up. I only know how to rise up. You are only bringing out the best in me. The best in me. Mr. Speaker, before I continue, I must inform you that I will write to the Commissioner of Police and your good self on the safety of my vehicle during the sittings of Parliament. In a time when there's talk about I've been arrested, talk about my vehicle being seized, I find it unacceptable that the Prime Minister's attaché, Mr. Norbert Williams, will be sneaking around my vehicle in the darkness of the night.
Remember just one thing. Refrain from naming persons.
Refrain from?
Naming.
Okay, I won't name. I will see the PM attaché, best known for his bow tie, sneaking around my vehicle in the darkness of the night. And when he is seen, Mr. Speaker, he pretends to be taking pictures of my vehicle. Mr. Speaker, if my vehicle cannot be guaranteed at night, I will have to bring my own security, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have noticed that United PAC, the social media expression of United Workers' Party, and Norbert Williams are in love with me. United PAC, Mr. Speaker, can continue to fabricate, to post, to invent, to do whatever they want. That's part of the game. Mr. Norbert Williams, I really don't want him to be in love with me.
Honorable
Mr.
member.
Speaker, sorry, the attaché, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of building a better society, the Prime Minister is leading the charge. No, he wants investigations into St. Jude Hospital, Grindberg, minister's accounts, and of course to satisfy his personal vendetta against me, the Jufali matter. Why the investigations, Mr. Speaker? In the opening remarks of the budget, and I will point out, Mr. Speaker, that when the document was circulated to us, you will notice that certain parts which were expressed last night are not included in the officially circulated document. But in the opening remarks last night, this is what the Prime Minister said. One of the promises we made in election time, Mr. Speaker, was to introduce to government affairs real transparency and accountability. But if the Prime Minister is interested in accountability and transparency, why not tell us about Senator Eubolus Remold matter? I am not interested in whether he committed adultery or not. That's for he and his wife, or why he was too cheap to give $700. But did he videotape himself in the nude in a government office whilst at work? St. Lucians want to know, Mr. Speaker, where is the accountability and where is the transparency? Has the Prime Minister ever addressed? Has the Prime Minister ever?
Honorable member. Just be, because I did ask you, do not name. I did ask you not to. So all I will say to you, refrain as much as possible from naming the individuals.
Mr. Speaker, how can I not name other honorable members if I'm making a point about them? If it's a member in this House, I'll have to refer, you could say to refer by the constituency they represent, but I'm referring to honorable members.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the standing order provides that we do not, we refer to members by the title.
Okay, so thank you very much for the guidance. But if he's so interested in accountability and transparency, why not tell us about the minister in the Ministry of Finance? I am not interested in whether he committed adultery or not. That's for he and his wife, or why he was too cheap not to pay $700. But did he videotape himself in the nude in a government office whilst at work? St. Lucians want to know, where is the accountability? Where is the transparency? Has the Prime Minister ever addressed this nation on the firing of the minister in the Ministry of Agriculture? In the midst of public speculation about the activities of the minister, we've heard nothing. St. Lucians want to know, where is the accountability and transparency? Has the Prime Minister reported on the investigation involving a member for Castries South East and heard this mockery of the truth? The Prime Minister admits, the minister, the member for Castries South East, admits that there is an investigation involving him. But the Prime Minister informs that he is not aware of an investigation and will investigate if there is an investigation. When will he report to the people of St. Lucia? St. Lucians want to know, where is the accountability and where is the transparency? Has the Prime Minister made public the DSH agreement to inform St. Lucians of how many passports he has offered to Theo Akin? St. Lucians want to know, where is the accountability and transparency? Has the Prime Minister updated the nation on the status of his pending court matter in relation to the use of public funds belonging to the Soufrière Town Council? Where is the accountability? Where is the transparency? Mr. Speaker, no government is free of making mistakes, whether it has been UWP or Labour administrations. But this current government takes it to another level with country regard for public feedback or adherence to the law of the land. So the questions to be asked about this budget statement is, who do these policies and programs really benefit? How does this budget offer the single mother in Monkey Tongue the benefits of citizenship in the land that gave her birth? How does this budget overcome the fear of the citizens of Fuasho have about their health care or the education of their children simply because of their economic position? What does this budget offer the ambitious secondary or tertiary school student from Marigot who has to consider a career of servitude, given that that is the primary focus of this government when these students possess entrepreneurship dreams? So I ask, how does this budget make young entrepreneurs, like the young lady from Basse Joseph, who makes handbags, Tiffy Zouk, how does it make her feel more inspired? So when you examine the budget address delivered last night, it is clearly apparent who they benefit. It is not for St. Lucians. It is for foreigners, friends, and family of this administration. Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out during my last presentation before this Honorable House, it is quite shocking to see several programs which benefit the youth and marginalized sectors of the population be reduced to zero. And to hear the laughable rebuttal to this, saying that although they might be zero, they will be implemented. Again, I ask, which right-thinking businessman runs a business like this by not making allocations within their budget for various projects, but telling the board of directors or shareholders that this will be implemented? This is just laughable. So, Mr. Speaker, let us examine the budget as presented and analyze the contents in relation to a few sectors. Let us start with unemployment. The Prime Minister explains on page 5 that one of the 6 key areas outlined in the last year's budget was employment. He is elated on page 6 that unemployment has fallen from 21.3% to 20.2%, from 21.3 to 20.2. He claims that they have achieved success in providing more jobs And listen to me, Mr. Speaker. He claims that they have achieved success in providing more jobs. And he goes on, and that unemployment have dropped from 9.6% to 5.3%, a point repeated by the member for Grosley. Elsewhere, Mr. Speaker, I have addressed the absurdity of the figures. Because when you study the figures, it shows you 6,000 jobs created in Library, 5,000 in Srozell. It really did not make sense. But I don't want to go down that road again. Let's do a short analysis, Mr. Speaker. I want you to go to the Social and Economic Review, Mr. Speaker, page 107. You will notice the reason for a decline in the unemployment rate. It is all statistical. And I ask any St. Lucian listening to just refer to the Social and Economic Review. On page 107, Mr. Speaker, the number of persons employed in St. Lucia declined from 82,379 to 81,718. I didn't say it, just like the member from Grosley said. It is in the Social and Economic Review. The number of people employed in St. Lucia declined last year. Underemployment reduced from 9.6 to 5.3%. The PM on page 6 says, it is because people are finding more sustainable work and earning more money. No. It means that your skilled workers are getting frustrated and leaving the country. That's why underemployment fell. If you doubt me, look at page 107 again. Your labor force is declining. So your labor force is declining. That means less people are looking for work in St. Lucia. That's what it says. And when you have less people employed in St. Lucia, the unemployment dipped slightly. The unemployment did not dip because of any miraculous, vast increase in number of jobs in this country. Less people are working in St. Lucia now than they did in 2016. And I did not say it. The Social and Economic Review said it. Mr. Speaker, let's move on quickly to the estimates. That there's a disjuncture between the estimates, which we debated 2 weeks ago, and the budget as presented last night, a disjuncture. There are zero sums for sporting programs, zero sums for major programs in the Department of Infrastructure. And I pointed out during the estimates debate that these programs total approximately $12.8 million. They all zero rated. The member for Castries North and Minister for Infrastructure explained that they will be done by build and finance mechanism. So the amount could not be put in the estimates. Listen to this. Those works will be done through the build and finance mechanism, so the estimates could not have been put into the figures could not have been put in the estimates. This is madness. Because you could have put projected costs, assessed costs, number of ways you could do it. But think about that. When there was no money, I could have accepted that explanation. Because under the SLP government, it was done. Roads were built under the bill and finance option. But now, there is a fuel tax. So there is money. There is no need for a build and finance option to be considered by the government because there is money. So, Mr. Speaker, taxes have been collected on the books because the estimate shows how much will be collected, but they have been spent off the books. Only zero has been stated. But now, on page 42, the Prime Minister announces last night, 42 million for slope management. There was zero in the estimates. 12 million for stabilization mitigation. There was zero in the estimates. And 7 million for river desilting. There was zero in the estimates. All those figures are to be spent over 3 years. Page 42 in the budget address. So there was zero in the estimates. And in the budget address, there are millions being stated. I wonder what's the real answer. Is it the bill and finance approach? Or is it some parallel budget that exists somewhere that has not been presented to this House? It goes on, Mr. Speaker. On page 51 of the budget, the Prime Minister speaks of a loan of US $50 million to be invested in road repairs and improvements and refurbishment of school. In the budget, he says there's going to be a loan of $50 million US for roads. But the estimates at zero. Page 44 also speaks of another loan from the Taiwanese of $100 million US for the airport, although the estimates only says 15 million US a year for airport tax. The Prime Minister says $15 million from airport tax will be used to repay the loan. The estimates only says we'll collect about 10 million or 11 million from airport tax. So I don't know how the balance will be raised. And the PM announced, listen to this, Mr. Speaker, that the redevelopment of the airport will start before year end. So in his budget statement, he is stating that he's getting a loan of 100 million for the airport. He's getting a loan of 50 million US. Totally, that's 400 million EC in loans. But the estimates are zero. So if the project is going to start before the end of the year, it means the monies would be available. But I heard nothing about international tendering and bidding for an airport that will start in a few months' time. How can a project that would cost $100 million US in St. Lucia, and you hear nothing about international tendering and bidding? And we all remember what happened in the last attempt under this government to refurbish the airport. Page 53 in the budget statement again last night, Mr. Speaker. Financing of the budget. And this one really baffles me. There is no mention of the US $100 million, nor US $50 million loans from the Republic of China and Taiwan. The Prime Minister presents a budget, says to us how he's going to finance it. He says in there he's getting a loan of 100 million US and another loan of 50 million US, but he never says in the financing that he's getting those loans from the Taiwanese. Why not? Is it because our borrowing now will be more like $700 million and not $300 million as stated in the estimates? Because the estimate says that the government is going to borrow $300 million for the financing gap. But yet, the budget address speaks of an additional $150 million US in loans that the government will get for projects that will start this year. Why is it not stated? Because if the $700 million is put in, and borrowing now becomes $700 million and not $300 million, the deficit will be widened, the balances would be widened, and debt to GDP would explode. Why is there a disjuncture between the budget statement last night and what the estimate has? Let's move on, Mr. Speaker. Let's take a look at tourism. A responsibility of the member for Answer Canaries. And he asked me, which movie am I looking at? It's all in the budget statement. Go and read it. St. Lucians can take it and read it. Mr. Speaker, a cursory look at the data on the performance of visitor arrivals will suggest that there was significant growth, as the Minister of Tourism has been touting. Indeed, the numbers have grown significantly. Stayover arrivals has increased by 11%, cruise arrivals have increased by 14%, and St. Lucia crossed the 1 million visitor mark in 2017. And the minister was boasting that it was the first time St. Lucia crossed the 1 million visitor mark. But let's take a closer look at the data. The big question is, what are the new initiatives can the Honorable Minister point to that has led to that growth that he so proudly boasts of? What are the major initiatives? In the first case, Mr. Speaker, and for the records of the House, it is not the first time that we have surpassed the million visitor mark, as it was achieved in 2009, it was achieved in 2010, and then again in 2014, and in 2016. And there was growth, significant growth for the first 6 months in 2016, before he came to office, and then it slipped thereafter to the end of the year. This administration has had the benefit of 500 additional rooms with the establishment of the Royalton Hotel, which was started under the previous SLP administration. This accounts for much of the growth that he boasts about and has contributed little towards.
456, correct.
With the Royalton came the Sunwing flights out of Canada as well. Those are sister companies, and discussions with them started way back in 2015. This administration cannot claim to that either. This, Mr. Speaker, has added to growth from the Canadian market. Out of the UK, there is the additional flight put on by Thomas Cook. Those discussions started at the end of 2015 and early 2016. Again, nothing that this administration can claim as contributing to their success in the UK market. And discussions for the additional winter service by United Airlines, which commenced late in 2016, started earlier that year, prior to his assumption to office. And that was always part of the St. Lucia Tourist Board growth strategy for the US market. Again, nothing that he can claim as originated under his tenure as minister. And we cannot discount the fact that St. Lucia would have benefited from the redirection of business from the northern territories, which suffered from the active and devastating hurricanes of 2017. This is the same explanation for the increase in cruise arrivals. So what we have in summary, Mr. Speaker, a minister gloating about passing the million visitor mark, which was achieved before. A minister having 500 more rooms to add to the capacity of the island that he had nothing to do with. A minister having additional airlift that he did not initiate. A minister who has benefited from the redirection of business to St. Lucia that he had nothing to do with. A minister who has obviously benefited from the momentum established by the previous administration, as he cannot point to one new initiative that accounts for the growth that he proudly and falsely claims. It is obvious that he is on a joyride. And I want to posit, Mr. Speaker, that based on the increases in room stock that did not originate with him, our arrival should have been higher. And I want to put forward that view. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be fair to the member. Let us look at the major initiatives undertaken by him and the administration. Firstly, the Soleil Summer Festival, a name and concept copied from Southern France. It is amazing, Mr. Speaker, that we have heard nothing of any review of the first year of Soleil. No report on expenditure, no report on returns, no report on visitors, no report on attendances, no report on tickets sold, and no reports, audited financial reports tabled in this honorable house. Nothing, nothing, nothing. For 2018, the summer festival started in January. Summer starts in January. A rum and food festival was held at a time when it is peak period for travelers, when most rooms are already sold. So why the festival again, Mr. Speaker? The second initiative was the tagline for St. Lucia was changed from simply beautiful to let her inspire you. What can I say, but it is simply uninspiring. The third initiative, a big announcement of a social media company that has niche and marquee in getting persons on social media to follow St. Lucia. It is called NG Global Media, and I want St. Lucians to go and do the research now. At the time of announcement, they did not even have a Facebook page or an Instagram account. Imagine that. They marquee, they're world class, but when they are announced as the social media company, they don't even have a Facebook page. They don't even have an Instagram account, but they're involved in social media. Today, and I ask St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker, and I ask you, Mr. Speaker, to go on Facebook. They have 67 followers on Facebook, and still no website today. Is this a case of somebody giving a friend a blight? Mr. Speaker, village tourism. How different is village tourism to heritage tourism project? Something which was implemented for many years in this country. And I've been waiting patiently, Mr. Speaker, because the people in Bannan Bay are waiting patiently when they will be consulted and informed of the plans for the area. Because if we go into village tourism now, we have a vested interest in Castries South in village tourism. In Marigot especially, Mr. Speaker, the resurfacing of the road. And I heard meetings were held with the beach vendors and other stakeholders, and I was not invited. But I would still know what happened. And I would still advise the stakeholders in terms of how to approach. But I want to call on all the vendors and other persons in Marigot to cooperate with the authorities. Because if it booms, if success comes, the whole community will be better for it. So I want to encourage all the vendors to cooperate with the police, to cooperate with the officials, and let us try to make sure Marigot assumes its rightful place on the tourism landscape of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, let's move quickly to education. I'm really passionate about this one, Mr. Speaker. Page 19 to 21 is proof, Mr. Speaker, that you can win an election with lies, but you cannot govern with lies. When the Prime Minister started to speak of investment in St. Lucians, I got excited thinking that this was going to be the definitive statement of where our country is going and how we are going to invest in our people. Let us examine what the Prime Minister said and what was missing. There is nothing said on expanding the school feeding program, something which was a manifesto promise of the United Workers' Party. One of the features of the expanded the school feeding program was the renovating of most of the kitchens in the primary schools on the island. Every primary school benefited from the program, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Is anything mentioned in the budget on the school feeding program? Is there anything in the estimates for the school feeding program? Nothing. Where is the budgeted amount? Where is the policy to cover all the needy students in St. Lucia? No money for school kitchens, no increase for supplies. Page 19 again, Mr. Speaker, speaks of curriculum development and the use of technology for teaching and learning will be high on the agenda of the government. The reality is that the government has effectively retarded the progress of this development in the education sector. There were many efforts under the member for Beaufort South and the previous member for Castro South to increase students' access to the internet. There was collaboration between the Ministry of Education and the community access centers, increasing the bandwidth in schools, the one laptop per child initiative at the secondary school, the mass training of teachers in ICT, and integrating ICT into the school curriculum. There is no more laptop program for the children in St. Lucia. But all we heard in here was GNET on page 19, a project which was signed by the former minister, James Fletcher, in April 2015. This was not done by the present government, but as usual, taking credit. There is nothing, Mr. Speaker, on early childhood education. And the Prime Minister almost cried last night when he spoke about the children. In 2012, it was estimated that 90% of early childhood sector was operated by private individuals and the other 10% by government. The majority of the early childhood caregivers were untrained at that time. The government of St. Lucia operated some 24 early childhood centers around the country. Hence, the SLP administration passed an early childhood education policy in collaboration with UNICEF in 2013. And importantly, Mr. Speaker, out of this policy came for the first time a teacher training component for early childhood at Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. The SLP administration also got funding from the CDB to renovate some of the early childhood centers. And the Prime Minister cries when he reads page 23. There is nothing for early childhood education. How are you investing in the people of St. Lucia? There is nothing on teacher training. There was a program to ensure that all teachers move towards having a 4-year teacher degree in education to make sure our teachers, and the Prime Minister is the biggest critic of the quality of teaching in this country. Yes. But I saw nothing in this. Instead, there was a termination of the program at Sir Arthur Lewis. You see, Mr. Speaker, the problem with the education system is this scant regard given to the sector by the present minister and government. There is really no investment in our people. And like somebody told me, the ministry is like Hollywood. Everybody acting. The PS is acting. The chief education officer is acting. The district education officers are acting. And even the minister is acting. Because there were, and Mr. Speaker, because there were several major and key education meetings and conferences where the Minister for Education was not present. The St. Lucia Minister for Education has been absent at several of those major conferences, And let me state some of them, and she can always explain whether she was there or not. The UNESCO Conference for Ministers with Responsibility for Education held in Paris in November 2017. The Global Education Fund Forum held together with the Ministers for Education meeting. The Commonwealth Conference of Education Ministers 2018 held in Fiji. The OECS Council of Ministers of Education held in Martinique in February 2018. That's 5 major international meetings where education is being discussed and our Minister of Education is not present. Then, Mr. Speaker, there was a meeting held in St. Lucia between the Cabinet of Ministers and CDB to discuss a special education project, an enhancement to the education system with funding from CDB. A meeting the Cabinet of Ministers with a delegation from CDB. That project, Mr. Speaker, very importantly, involved enhancing the infrastructure of special education centers and schools, training of special education teachers, and the construction of a center for students with behavioral problems in the education system. Something which was conceived by the Labour Party in 2015. The CDB came to have the final discussions on the project with the government of St. Lucia. The minister was on island but not present. Why? And this is the crux of the matter facing our education system. There is no regard for the teachers, for the students, and the school plans. But I want to say something about the 43% before I end on education. I watched the Prime Minister with all his drama explaining what he meant. And he said that he misspoke and that he was allowing the discussions to go where it was and to see what would be the reaction. And the Prime Minister went on to say that the most important thing was that the system was failing the youth. And I want to ask the Prime Minister, where were you ever fighting for the youth of this country? Where? In 1996, only 43% of students who passed common entrance could get a secondary school place. 43%. Not that only 43% passed, you know. Only 43% of those who passed could have gotten a place in a secondary school. In 1996, 5,102 students had a common entrance, but there were only 2,208 places. By 2006, 4,141 students had a common entrance, and every child was guaranteed a place. This is what the St. Lucia Labour Party did. So yes, 43% of St. Lucians male only have a primary school education, because that 43% could not have gone to a secondary school to get an education because there were no school places. And yes, that number could have been much higher if the SLP did not ensure that there was universal secondary education. And Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you something. There may be issues with the universal secondary education, and when the Central Labour Party gets back into office, we will fix it. We conceived of it, and we know how to fix it. Mr. Speaker, let's look at investment. And I heard the member for Roselle Saltibus earlier today, and he usually says that he's not a politician, but today he sounded like he had finally become a politician. So I hope he can provide some responses on the investment policy for this country. Mr. Speaker, the SLP had signed for 4 hotel developments. None have started. Why? None have started. So let us start examining some of them and understand what's the investment policy of this government. Range development at Black Bay. Mr. Speaker, I have been very critical of the deal which was done with Ridge Developments. The Prime Minister thought it better, rather than let range developments follow the traditional CIP real estate approach, to allow them to earn monies through the donation mode, which will be given to them at a loan of 2%. What's the status of the hotel? I want the Prime Minister to inform the people of St. Lucia, what is the status of the range development at Black Bay? But more importantly, what has become of the deal that was done with Range? The monies that would have been granted to Range as a loan, where are those monies? And what are the claims of Range on this country? We need accountability and transparency. And when the Prime Minister answers, I will get a follow-up moment sometime in the future to respond. The GP Group as Sabusha, Mr. Speaker. I love that concept, Mr. Speaker. And although the member for Strozel at the time did not support it, I think he had said he preferred warehouses in Strozel. And you know why I liked it, Mr. Speaker? Because the developers wanted to build a hotel that was integrated with the community, the historical nature of the community, that they were going to design it to fit into the landscape. They were going to build a market within it where the local, and you know Strozel is very well known for some of its products, would come and sell. It would have a cultural amphitheater because of what Shabusha used to be. And I'm very disappointed to see what has become of this. The concept has changed. And it is now just another hotel in another very important historical area of St. Lucia. Maybe the Prime Minister can tell us what's happening to the hotel in Belvedere by the Boca group. What's happening? The member for Ancillary Canaries can probably tell us some more. We're already in discussions with developments at Canals and 4B. What has happened to those developments? What has happened to them? So the Prime Minister and government says they have a new model for investment. So let's examine the new model. Range at Black Bay. How can the Prime Minister and ministers explain to St. Lucians that they're going to take $400 million of our passport CIP revenue and give it to a developer at 2% interest? We said in this house that this was risky. It was unnecessary. It was a bad idea. And the Prime Minister said we did not know what we were talking about. We said, what if he decided he was not building the hotel anymore? What was his risk? What would he be losing? We would be the losers. St. Lucia would be the losers. And today, will this hotel be built? And what are the liabilities against the people of St. Lucia? And what has happened to our passport monies? That's what we need to know. DSH is the worst example of fashion and investment policy. The Prime Minister gleefully says to this nation that phase 1 has been approved and completed. And here the dynamics, here the elements of phase 1. That we're going to take our land, give it to the developer who is going to use it as collateral to get a loan to build a racetrack. After he's built it, we will allow him to sell our passports. And when he's collected the amount of money he valued the racetrack as, he will give us back the racetrack. We will then engage him to manage it. Of course, there must be a management fee. Why? Because the developer needs a racetrack to attract high rollers. But all the other ancillary investments that will be built with our passport money, he's not giving it back to us. He's only giving us back one, the racetrack. Why? Because the racetrack is not profitable. Now, Mr. Speaker, explain that to me. Explain that logic to me. That hits me at the core as a St. Lucian. Explain that to me. And how can somebody come to this nation and gleefully says, this is my new investment policy? And Mr. Speaker, Ojo Labs. Last year, $10 million was budgeted for Ojo Labs. This year, another $7 million. Another $7 million in the estimates this year. And we told there are 50 people employed at Ojo Labs. 50. How do you pay the salary of everyone? How do you pay the monthly recurrent bill? How did you pay to retrofit the warehouse? How do you do it with St. Lucian taxpayers' money to employ 50 people? And another $7 million is in the estimates. And you tell me, Mr. Speaker, this is wise investment policy. You see, what has baffled me most, while the Prime Minister is busy giving foreign investments, the entire world that we have in St. Lucia, why has he not supported homegrown investors and entrepreneurs? Where are the special concessions and incentives for our homegrown investors? Who is paying the staff for them? If anything, Mr. Speaker, they need support more than the foreign investors. Mr. Speaker, let's spend a few minutes on CIP. Mr. Speaker, I always took pride as a young St. Lucian professional. Well, I'm no longer young, but when I was younger and I was starting my career, I took pride as a professional. Wherever in the world I studied or I worked, I wanted to always flag St. Lucia. Wherever I roamed, St. Lucia. I took pride in St. Lucian professionalism. And Cricket World Cup restored and enhanced my faith in the professionals that we have in St. Lucia, across all sectors. Because when all other islands were preparing to host Cricket World Cup, repeatedly, we were the best destination. We had the best gathering of professionals in St. Lucia to host Cricket World Cup. One of those professionals was a lady who excelled. She was by then a regional consultant advising regional governments. Then, Mr. Speaker, she was so good at what she did, the ICC employed her to be part of the World T20. When that tournament ended, she came to work at the West Indies Cricket Board. And then FIFA employed her to work with the FIFA World Cup. And she's an exceptional woman and an exceptional professional. We recruited her from Canada, from working for FIFA, managing 5 stadia for the FIFA World Cup. She's just about the best you can find for logistics and operations. We recruited her from working for FIFA to come and set up the CIP for us and ask her to do it in 3 months. And the Prime Minister criticizes her appointment and praises his firing of her. He said that she had no experience in CIP. He said she said that, you know, was my best friend's wife. The thing about it, she's an exceptional woman and a talented St. Lucia professional. She has worked globally and she has been outstanding. The Prime Minister did not say that she is the daughter of his constituency chairperson. He did not say that. Think about it, Mr. Speaker. The SLP, under the member for Beaufort South, would employ someone who is the daughter of the leader of the opposition constituency group. Imagine when I had to go to the member for Beaufort South and say to him, I want to recommend this person for the job. He asked me one question. Can she do the job? And I said, yes, she can. He said, go ahead. Because he knew she would not be political and that she would put St. Lucia first.
Honorable member, you have 15 minutes.
So it's easy to think that the Prime Minister fired her because she was my best friend's wife. That is just deflection. She was fired because of what she refused to do at the CIP. But can I ask the Prime Minister, did the person he appointed to replace her have any CIP experience? Did the chairman he appointed have any CIP experience? Did anyone he appointed to the board have any CIP experience? When this CIP started, there were 3 people in St. Lucia who were following CIP conferences. Mr. Nicholas John, Mr. Thaddeus Antoine, and myself. The Prime Minister has destroyed the CIP. Destroyed it. Yet he says he does not want my advice. No problem, Mr. Prime Minister. If you had taken the advice on this side, you would not have St. Lucia in the embarrassing position that you have placed St. Lucia. It is not you that's the loser, Prime Minister. It is St. Lucia that loses. Firstly, we warn you not to lower the price, that it would start a price war. We had spoken to the other islands and we respected their views, that they did not want a price war. Instead, we saw a strategic opportunity to carve out a niche area for St. Lucia. We were going to be exclusive and we were going to be premium. Prime Minister said, no, you all don't know what you're all about. Secondly, we warned him not to remove the net worth of $3 million. This would attract low-value individuals who most likely would be problematic. And thirdly, we warn him about the due diligence and its importance, and that he should not, and that there should be no political interference in the due diligence process. Mr. Speaker, he refused all the advice we gave him. And you know, the price for a St. Lucian donation moved from 200,000 US to 100,000 US in January of last year. I just want to give you a little comparison. For last year, it was reported that we processed 279 applications. St. Kitts, after the hurricane in September, reduced their price to 150,000 US, and by February had processed 575 applications. Think about that. St. Lucia for an entire year, as 100,000 could barely process 279, and St. Kitts in about 5 months can process about 500 odd applications. The performance of our CIP has been deplorable, and it is because the Prime Minister messed it up. And then the Prime Minister has to explain to us, why did he have to revoke persons that you've just given citizenships and passports? Why? And the Prime Minister has to tell us how many other persons that have already been revoked but have not been gazetted yet. How many more? Because I know there are others. And then most importantly, how will the Prime Minister deal with all the lawsuits that will come his way? That's critical, Mr. Speaker. This thing is just starting. It's affecting our reputation globally because persons are being revoked and people are being accused of committing crimes and a lot is being said. But, Mr. Speaker, it will get a lot worse if you cannot adequately prove some of the things that are being said. But, Mr. Speaker, the most important thing for me on the CIP is where is the missing CIP monies? Because, Mr. Speaker, by my maths and by what was stated in the estimates, there's a considerable gap. And I'm sure there's a very good explanation, Mr. Speaker, of why there is such a gap. We asked the Prime Minister during the budget, the estimate debate, can you just please explain to the people of St. Lucia? I would hate to believe there is not a good explanation. So, Mr. Prime Minister, provide the people of St. Lucia with the explanation of why there is such a gap, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced in the budget last night about a residency program. Just a couple weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, the OECD said that CIP programs are being used to get tax residency and thus avoid paying tax. Their citizens, that is. CIP programs in the Caribbean, St. Lucia was not part of it, said, no, that's not true, because you must reside in a country for 180 days for you to qualify to pay tax. So persons have citizenships, but they don't reside in our territories, so they don't pay tax, so we cannot be faulted for they not paying tax. The Prime Minister did not say a lot last night about the residency programs. But under the residency program, they will no longer require 180 days, and thus they are falling right into the arguments being advanced by the OECD. Right into it. The exact thing the OECD is saying they do not want. The Prime Minister announced last night that that's what we're going to do in St. Lucia. The reason why we went on a blacklist in the first place is because this administration passed a headquarters agreement, at least one of the reasons, that was seen as contributing to tax-based erosion, Mr. Speaker. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, and I want it noted, Mr. Speaker, I want it noted that the Prime Minister should not be mocking the EU and the OECD by announcing that you're going to do something further to erode their taxes. We will go right back on the blacklist. We warned the Prime Minister before. He did not listen to us. And we're going to find ourselves in the same difficulty again if the Prime Minister does not listen. He doesn't want my advice, but what I can suggest to the Honorable House, the Prime Minister should prepare a white paper for discussion, circulate it to other persons outside of this Honorable House to get their feedback. We have some very good persons in this country, professionals in the financial services sector, who can give him some very good advice. And a word of caution, Mr. Prime Minister, be very careful before you go any further. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this budget is not for the people. It is for foreigners, friends, and family of the United Workers' Party administration. Mr. Speaker, we've been asked, in exchange for a job, to forget our rights, the right to our beaches, our right to our patrimony. We have been asked, in exchange for hotel development or racetrack development, to forget about the sale of our passports and the need for proper due diligence. We have been asked, in exchange for a new road, to forget that $2 million was added to the price. We have been asked, in exchange for a retaining wall, to forget that over 30 direct purchase awards were given in one day. We have been asked, in exchange for a drain, to forget about an explanation on how our fuel tax money, which is supposed to be in a lockbox, is being spent. We have been asked, in exchange for a new airport, to forget that there have been no international tendering and bidding. Mr. Speaker, we can't forget those things. St. Lucia is the land that we love. Wherever we roam, St. Lucia. Our resources are finite, and these should be vested in our people and in our business community to spur confidence and stimulate economic activity, and not just hand over to foreigners for their own good and then export all the spoils to their homeland or some other jurisdiction and leave us barren. I cannot support this budget. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for tourism, information, and broadcasting, and member for ancillary canneries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was encouraged by the Honourable Member for Labrie. He said that I should not be intimidated by the podium, that it works well for short men. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my support for this bill finds its inspiration from an increased rate of gross domestic product by 2.5%, a reducing unemployment rate at just over 20%, a primary surplus, Mr. Speaker, of over 45 million, and the current surplus upwards of 62 million. Mr. Speaker, these improved economic indicators signal the beginning of a revival of the overall economy. Building a resilient economy, Mr. Speaker, is the foundation of our aspiration to create more jobs, improve the education sector, and deliver a quality healthcare system. While we have yet not arrived, Mr. Speaker, we are currently well on our way to doing so. Mr. Speaker, when the United Workers' Party assumed the government, unemployment was high. The economic growth of the country, Madam Speaker, was very slow, averaging 1.3% over the last decade. And the debt was extremely high, Mr. Speaker, a situation which applied shackles on the economic fortunes of the people of St. Lucia. Madam Speaker, as a result, what they did, Mr. Speaker, was place their hopes in the confidence of the government of the United Workers' Party. Mr. Speaker, I have reasons to be optimistic about the future, as all indications suggest that unemployment is down, economic growth is on the uptick, and there's a new strategy to manage the persistent stronghold of
Honourable
high
Member,
debt levels.
do you need protection from both sides?
No, that's okay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's okay, that's okay. You know, Mr. Speaker, they say that defense, they say that attack is the best form of defense. And so their attacks is their defense because they know I'm coming. So, Mr. Speaker, they know very well I'm coming. So, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to give my fullest endorsement. See, I'm trying to behave myself tonight. Of the theme adopted by this government, Mr. Speaker, building resilience today to secure our future. This is instructive of the kind of forward and proactive thinking that characterizes this administration, committed to working for not just some of the people, as being suggested tonight, but, Mr. Speaker, but for all of the people of St. Lucia. And, Mr. Speaker, remember very well in the debate on the estimates, my colleague, member for Grosley, did tell us in very eloquent fashion how when he came in as Minister of Sport, he didn't victimize the Honourable Member for Castries South. He he actually kept him on as CEO for the World Cup. And when I heard him talking, Mr. Speaker, about it, I recalled very well that it was because of the generosity and the caring and the compassion of a United Workers' Party philosophy that kept you. So, Mr. Speaker, we're not in the business of victimizing. We work for all of the people, not just for friends and family. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to adopt the 4 main focus areas identified to build the much-needed resilience for a bright and prosperous future, stemming from human reliance, a resilient public service, resilient physical infrastructure, debt sustainability, all important for the comprehensive and sustained development of a strong and robust St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, tourism led the revival. Mr. Speaker, tourism, which I am charged with responsibility, is expected to contribute heavily to building a strong and resilient nation that today's global geopolitics demand of small island developing states. Mr. Speaker, therefore, please allow me to update this honorable House on the outstanding year which the tourism sector recorded in 2017. Not only was St. Lucia the Caribbean Tourism Organization's fastest growing tourist destination in 2017, the island also registered a record-breaking year. Mr. Speaker, for it was in 2017 that total tour of arrivals were at 386,127, and this is the first time, honorable member, that St. Lucia had recorded such a high number of stayover visitors. Mr. Speaker, this represented an 11% growth in airline passengers. This is the first time in our history that we've recorded this amount by air. Mr. Speaker, the year 2017 also recorded a strong rebound in the cruise tourism at 669,217 cruise passengers, or a 13% increase in cruise passengers visiting our country. Mr. Speaker, this is in response to a decline by 13%, which we have inherited by the previous administration the year prior. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for Castries South, who is claim to fame in tourism, is receiving briefs from individuals who, from time to time, Mr. Speaker, may mislead him on where the industry is going. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact, and Mr. Speaker, that he is no expert in the industry. Because if he was an expert and he had a clue as to what was going on, he would have known, Mr. Speaker, that Royalton never opened 500 rooms. That when we came in, Mr. Speaker, that they had 350 rooms. And Mr. Speaker, in the third quarter of 2017, they opened an additional 19 to bring the total number of rooms to 456. And so, honorable member, what I would advise is that you come, have a meeting, and try to understand what's really happening in tourism. Because as I listen to you, I hear a number of misinformation, and I do understand, because you did the same thing at West Indies Cricket. You tend to speak about things that you absolutely do not understand.
Honorable member.
And so, Mr. Speaker.
You speak through the chair.
And so, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am on record. I am on record, Mr. Speaker, of saying, and Mr. Speaker, I want to choose my words very carefully because I have a lot to say. I am on record of saying, Mr. Speaker, that while the honorable gentleman worked at West Indies Cricket, that he received 14 lawsuits as CEO and lost all of them. His score, therefore, is 14-0. In fact, they're about to fire him, Mr. Speaker, when they realized that he was going to bankrupt the organization in lawsuits. Mr. Speaker, not only did he misspeak, he's on record as well as also saying that a judgment by a magistrate from Trinidad was unfair and, Mr. Speaker, wasn't in keeping with the law. Mr. Speaker, the president at the time, who he described as a calming influence, Mr. well, the president of the then West Indies Cricket Board, I'm not allowed to name names, did actually write a letter apologizing to the judge after the honorable member for Castries South had misbehaved rather poorly. So, Mr. Speaker, that
Honorable member.
Yes. This kind of...
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I always try to get members. You have some latitude, but always remember. Now, let me be specific. I'm referring here now to 65-2. So always try to keep your presentation, according to 65-2, within the financial and economic state of the island and the general principles of government policy. So whatever you say, you need to tie it to what you say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just drawing the principle.
I have no issue. Don't go that far that you kind of tie it to the
So,
general
Mr. Speaker,
government
we
policy.
see a principle here of a member who are speaking on matters for which he doesn't have an acute understanding. So, Mr. Speaker, the cruise industry continues to play an essential role in the development of our economy in 2018, when Port Castries, for the first time, hosted a quantum-class vessel, Anthem of the Seas, with a capacity of 5,000 passengers. Mr. Speaker, this historic call to Port Castries by Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines was made possible by the 63 million expansion of berth number 1 at Point Seraphin. It has positioned the island for even greater levels, Mr. Speaker, of cruise arrivals this year, when we are projected to welcome 800,000 visitors via cruise ships. Mr. Speaker, the overwhelming praise heaped on the sector's performance by taxi drivers, vendors, and the general public were loud enough to silence the shallow attempts of the naysayers and the opposition to undermine what has been a buoyant cruise season. Mr. Speaker, there were days that Port Castries was overwhelmed by the sheer number of vessels which came to the port. Mr. Speaker, we were forced to tender at times in the open seas as the berthing facilities became inadequate. Mr. Speaker, the position that the successful cruise industry, which is clear to even the opposition leader, who is somehow suggesting that due to the hurricane season, we have succeeded. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say to him that St. Lucia hasn't succeeded. We've actually lost, because Carnival Cruise Lines, which brings the Fascination vessel every single Thursday, it has a capacity of about 2,500 passengers, and coming 4 times a week at 100% occupancy would mean that on a monthly basis we would lose 10,000 beds from one cruise line. Mr. Speaker, FEMA was using the ship, and that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency of the United States. And what they were doing, Mr. Speaker, was using the vessel to carry Hurricane 8 supplies to some of their jurisdictions in the Caribbean that were affected. So if you think of the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, 2 of the jurisdictions most affected by the hurricane season, we see therefore that they hauled the ship out of operation, and St. Lucia actually lost the capacity of about 30,000 visitors. We still grew as a result, Mr. Speaker, despite this position. So this had absolutely nothing, this had absolutely nothing, Honorable Mr. Speaker, to do with the hurricane season. The other thing I want to point out is that I was part of an OECS delegation that went to the cruise lines shortly after the hurricane season with a view to discuss the whole situation. And Mr. Speaker, we were looking at the potential of perhaps a new home port in light of Puerto Rico's misfortune. We were told then, Mr. Speaker, that the cruise lines had so much confidence in the rebuilding effort that it was only in a matter of weeks that they were going to reinstate Puerto Rico as a home port. Hence, there was no chance for the relocation. So I just want to bring this House up to date on those matters. And I want to debunk the ridiculous suggestion by my friend from Castries Southeast, who believes that Castries East, Castries Southeast is a lot more brilliant than that. But my friend from Castries East, who believes that $5 can block a hole, that this had absolutely nothing to do with the hurricane season, but it had everything to do, Mr. Speaker, with a government that is committed, a government that was clear about what it wanted to do. Mr. Speaker, when I came in as minister, and I met the old regime of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, where Mr. Hilaire, the honorable member for Castries South, would get his briefs. Mr. Speaker, it was clear then that there was no clear strategy as it relates to what we were going to do about the cruise industry. And the industry had declined, if you remember, and the social economic review is clear, the cruise sector, by about 20% at that time. It was midway a year through. And I asked the question, between SLASPA and the Tourist Board, who is responsible for marketing the destination for cruise tourism? Having recognized, Mr. Speaker, that the focus was clearly on hotel guests and the land-based tourism, I was told that there is an ambiguity between the Tourist Board and SLASPA. So I said to the leadership of the board then, that from today, we are making a decision that tourism will lead the charge and market this destination to cruise passengers. Mr. Speaker, the result is very, very clear. In the social economic review, we will see in table 5, we see that in the quarterly performances, table 6 rather, in the quarterly performance, you would see that cruise passengers did had a tremendous spike in the second quarter, contrary to the momentum that the member for Castries South is suggesting that we inherited. We didn't inherit anything about a directionless position. We didn't inherit anything different from a jazz festival that was hemorrhaging the Tourist Board. We didn't inherit anything but debt. The board was $10 million in debt. No tour operator wanted to work with St. Lucia because St. Lucia was bad news. We were in the red. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it is painful to be in the red. You know, my friends over there. Painful to be in the red. And so, Mr. Speaker, having suffered so much pain, we have now brought the board to zero debt, and we are now in the black. But you see, Mr. Speaker, when people stand up and speak, and they engage in these propaganda machinery for cheap politics, and you try to undermine the #1 sector, tourism, that so many people depend on their jobs, that so many taxi drivers rely on for businesses, and you raise up and you quote numbers that are not true. It's the old trick in politics. I have the numbers. Here it is. Here it is. I mean, that is not what the figures say. The figures are actually very clear, Mr. Speaker. In table 5, table 6 rather, it shows a quarterly performance of the industry. And we see here, Mr. Speaker, interestingly, in the year 2016, it's there, social economic review, the same numbers you quoted. In the first quarter, Mr. Speaker, it showed that in 2015, there were total number of visitors, 415,288. That's 2015. You said we were growing. But in 2016, the first quarter, Mr. Speaker, slumped from 415 to 366,995,000, and we're growing. Which school did you go to, my friend? I mean, the second quarter, Mr. Speaker, we see here that the numbers went from 211,000 153,000, and then it slumped in 2016 to 179,941. So what we actually did inherit, Mr. Speaker, was an absolute crisis in the tourism sector. It was declining vividly. When we said so in the election campaign, right, I was called short. They said I weighed 72 pounds and I was 5 inches tall. That is true. It was said by the member for Castries East. And we were telling them that the industry is in crisis and that the Caribbean was underperforming. The region had its most glorious year, and in 2016 it grew by 7%, and St. Lucia only managed to grow by 2%. And here you're coming to tell me that I inherited success? Are you kidding me? I take my job very seriously, you know. So Mr. Speaker, there's a difference from when your sweat is in the game from someone who receives a brief. Mr. Speaker, I am a hotelier. I am a tourism man, okay? And I believe in the fortunes of this industry, and I believe in what it can do. This is not somebody briefing me. These are real life stories that I have lived, and these are real life stories that I continue to live. This is not a brief. So when you guys come to play politics with the people's business, do so when I'm absent, because I, standing behind this podium, will not allow you. The other thing that was said tonight, Mr. Speaker, was that our government is somehow favoring the big guys. It was said very clearly, we're favoring the big guys, and we have no compassion for the small guys. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have in my hand here a document that is well known across the tourism sector. It's called the Tourism Stimulus and Amendment Act of 2016. And it was enacted by the previous St. Lucia Labour Party administration. Mr. Speaker, in amendment of Schedule 1 of the Act, it says here, Mr. Speaker, that it lists a scale tax credit for investors. And Mr. Speaker, it ranges from 500,000. If you're investing 500,000 to 5 million, you get a tax credit of 20%. It means these are the small guys, the people that are opening small bed and breakfast facilities. This is the range where the small St. Lucian businessman will be. But, Mr. Speaker, it is very discriminatory. It favors all the big investors. It says that if you invest 25 to 50 million, Mr. Speaker, you will get not a 20% like the small man, but you will get a 60% tax credit. So, Mr. Speaker, clearly we see they are trying to brainwash the people, and they are doing things that goes contrary to what they're saying. It's like VAT. When they're in opposition, they say VAT is oppressive to the poor. When they get into power, it has become absolutely necessary. It is the panacea for economic development. We have to do our self-control, debt and fiscal management scenario. Mr. Speaker, it is consistent. 1 minute, you get Mr. Tony. The other minute, you get Miss Ann. And then you get Tony. So, Mr. Speaker, you have a government, Mr. Speaker, with a triple personality. You know, they're in opposition, they have a leadership struggle, and then they go into government. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's 3 different personalities that they have. So you can't be doing the same thing. Do something differently from what you're saying, and then try to fool people that you are for the small man. Mr. Speaker, look at what we have done. We've come in, and we've said, and we've implemented. And I want to congratulate my boss, the Prime Minister, who I'm very proud of. Because when we came in, he said, listen, for too long, our people have been left behind. This is a personal conversation. And he said, you know, if we implement village tourism, if we give the young people a chance who want to open bed and breakfast, and I'm telling you the difference, listen to this. the difference between heritage tourism and village tourism. He said, if we give our people a chance who want to open up bed and breakfast facilities, who want to open up sites and attractions, who want to invest in a boat, Mr. Speaker, we have left that open for them. We will put money in the development bank because financing, as we know, regardless of the sector, has been a challenge for micro enterprises in St. Lucia. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is the single largest transformational policy in tourism that we will implement this year. And I am telling you that it will be done this year, because as long as I'm alive, I will ensure that it happens for the people of St. Lucia. There it is, Mr. Speaker, working for the people of this country. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, I get angry when I hear these guys play games with people's business. I get emotional. Because, Mr. Speaker, the times...
Honorable Member?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I do not want to keep interjecting, but these guys, they are not in here.
Honorable members, yes. Honorable members. I am always going to be so guided by you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the year 2018 continued to produce improved results for the tourism sector, with the U.S. increasing already by 12% year-to-date as of February. Mr. Speaker, overall growth is at 5%, and the UK market, Mr. Speaker, is at 9%. Mr. Speaker, cruise and yacht arrivals for 2018 are also another area of significant growth, with cruise passengers by 70%. And yacht arrivals, Mr. Speaker, has increased by a whopping 30%. Thus, Mr. Speaker, the year began with a favorable level of growth, giving us a greater opportunity to create more jobs, increase revenue for small businesses, and encourage more St. Lucians to participate in the tourism industry. On the investment front, Mr. Speaker, I want to join the Honorable Prime Minister, who eloquently enunciated, Mr. Speaker, and it clearly said that in the next 4 years, we will add an additional 2,000 rooms to the existing room stock of this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, when I hear the suggestion that, there are no investments, and the honourable member is for Castries South, has done the most unpatriotic thing, but it seems like it's a Labour Party thing. He is on record of writing an article in the Miami Herald, Mr. Speaker, and when you get a chance, please give it a read. But it's the most ridiculous and unpatriotic thing I've ever found. All kinds of disparaging things about the country. And Mr. Speaker, despite all these assaults...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, can it be made a document of the House? Because...
Honourable Member Vansler is raising a point of order. Let him...
Yeah. So he's imputing improper motives.
Honourable Member... No. I'm just saying to you that you will have to indicate...
You never know what he's standing on.
Mr. Speaker... Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is imputing improper motives, Mr. Speaker.
Standing on what?
Mr. Speaker, can he make the document a document of the House? Imputing improper motives. Mr. Speaker.
Are you continuing explaining your point of orders, or you? No. Honourable member, you in fact made reference to
Mr. Speaker.
The Herald.
Yes, Mr.
All
Speaker.
I'm saying to you is that you would have to be specific, because you're asking or you're saying that something was written in the Herald without giving us a little more information. If you cannot give more information to direct at least me to that particular article or newspaper, then I want to ask that you refrain from it.
Very well. So, Mr. Speaker, on the investment front, these includes a 380-room resort from Sandoz. And Mr. Speaker, it's the launching of their 6-star La Souce product in St. Lucia. And it's a program they started in Grenada, Mr. Speaker, and they're about to launch it in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, we will also see a 250-room resort from the Fairmont establishment, and that will be in the Choiseul constituency. Mr. Speaker, 2 brands powered by the Apple Leisure Group, Secrets, 350 rooms, and Zoetry, Mr. Speaker, a brand that is well known in the Latin Caribbean destinations of Damrep and Mexico, Mr. Speaker, will also have 350 rooms at Canals Bay in Micoud South. Are all projects that should commence this year. When completed, Mr. Speaker, these are projected to add 3,250 new direct and indirect jobs to the local economy. Mr. Speaker, we also see a very, very good and positive outlook for the airlift sector. Mr. Speaker, we continue to be encouraged by developments in the sector, which will have at least 2 exciting agreements and add tremendous capacity to St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, just recently we welcomed Inter-Caribbean to our island with 3 weekly flights out of Dominica connecting our country to the Southern Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, I would like to also announce that come December, that American Airlines will start a 2nd additional flight out of Miami. Mr. Speaker, this will add 1,120 new seats weekly to our destination, Mr. Speaker, giving the destination a better chance to grow and to compete. Mr. Speaker, a lot was said today about marketing, and it was said by a former Minister of Tourism. And I am on record of saying that his knowledge of tourism also needs evaluation. Mr. Speaker, it was suggested tonight that no new marketing arrangements or anything that is substantial was done by the authority. Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear that not only have we changed the tagline, "Let her inspire you," Mr. Speaker, we have also increased the number of interviews that we have done on major US networks like Fox and NCB and CNN. Mr. Speaker, we've also increased our visibility on social media by 10-fold. Mr. Speaker, in response to the hurricane, we also ran a very successful campaign in our key markets and working with tour operators. And the campaign under the tagline, "No time like now to book St. Lucia," was very successful. Mr. Speaker, we also had the successful hosting of the Rum and Food Festival, which, Mr. Speaker, saw some 24 journalists from the international press coming to cover the event with a gross media impression of about 50 million. It is also interesting to note that we only spent $350,000, Mr. Speaker. This, Mr. Speaker, we were able to accomplish with a reduced expenditure at the Tourist Board. Mr. Speaker, you would see in the estimates that the expenditure for the board will decline by $3 million. And Mr. Speaker, despite this decline in expenditure, we were able to accomplish all of this. All of this would mean nothing, Mr. Speaker, if we do not move with haste to institute programs that would generate increased economic penetration from the tourism sector. For this reason, we are on course to implement the village tourism program this year to allow for greater participation from St. Lucia nationals. 8 villages, Mr. Speaker, and towns will benefit from the program, namely Grosley, Castries, Ancillary, Canaries, Soufrière, Chazelle, Labrie, Micoud, and Dennery. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Tourism will expend upwards of $4 million on the OECS Tourism Competitive Program in an effort to enhance overall destination product offering and raise revenue levels. However, if St. Lucia as a destination is to maximize its fullest potential, the governance of the sector has been cited by this administration as an area of priority. Cabinet has just approved, Mr. Speaker, the adoption of a National Tourism Advisory Council, which is earmarked to transition to the National Tourism Council pending the finalization of the legislative framework. This will bring together at least 17 public sector agencies and private sector bodies to cohesively manage and develop the foundation of our economy, tourism. No longer can we manage the affairs of our lead sector in isolation of the broader development goals of the country. The time has come for us to position tourism with a wide interface with departments like the National Conservation Authority, the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Association of Manufacturers in an effort to strengthen forward and backward linkages, Mr. Speaker, in the same vein of increasing economic potential. Mr. Speaker, the Council will finally allow the left hand to know what the right hand is doing, giving us the best chance to build a robust and economically resilient nation. In addition to a total of $43,015,927, which have been made available in the estimates for tourism marketing and product development within the tourism sector over the next financial year. This is divided, Mr. Speaker, into 4 main areas of concentration: policy and planning, Mr. Speaker, tourism development services, tourism marketing and promotion, and information and broadcasting, the other pillar upon which my department stands. Mr. Speaker, allocation is also made in this appropriation bill under the Ministry of Tourism, Information and Broadcasting for the government information services to the tune of $1.49 million. We will effect a major overhaul of the national television network programming to generate an improved level of program content, subject areas such as local and Caribbean history, sports and culture, lifestyles, and a greater focus on information relevant for nation building are all poised to receive renewed focus under this new thrust. Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to clarify suggestions by the opposition leader and certain sections of the SLP propaganda machine that our earlier announced intention to reactivate consultation on the draft broadcast bill is an attempt to censor the media. Mr. Speaker, the facts are that the OECS from as far back as 2009 to 2010 sought to regularize the broadcast sector in the sub-region. This was in response to a proliferation of radio and television stations that were emerging during that period at an unprecedented pace. It was felt, Mr. Speaker, that this new phenomenon was amplifying without a set of specific codes that would guide and develop the sector. In the case of St. Lucia, the bill has been worked on by both UWP and SLP administrations and have been discussed with local stakeholders for nearly 10 years. The former executive of the Media Workers Association met with the former Minister of Information and Broadcasting at least once on the said subject matter, as both showed deep interest in improving the local media landscape. Mr. Speaker, large sections of the media and the public continue to be concerned about standards of media activity, whilst the debate rages on about the quality, appropriateness, and timing of media content. The local arts community is also on public record of claiming a disruptive bias to foreign media content by local broadcasters, while local broadcasters, Mr. Speaker, have indicated that cost and demand implications are enormous considerations for them. Resultant to all this is consultation on the establishment of a broadcast authority and regulations that would add more structure for a free but responsible and ethical press. Mr. Speaker, at no time it is our intention to muzzle the press, nor censor nor intimidate the media, as some has unjustifiably suggested. Mr. Speaker, I happen to have been covering a political meeting on the market steps in my capacity as a TV journalist 20 years ago, when one of my close colleagues in the media was labeled a media terrorist. I know all too well, Mr. Speaker, how such attacks on the press can incite ill will against media practitioners from passionate supporters of political parties. Mr. Speaker, our approach to have consultation on this bill, which we have inherited from the files of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting under the leadership of the previous regime, is a far cry from the ill-fated 361, which was hurriedly passed and subsequently repealed by the previous administration after it came under vehement attacks from the local press. 361, as it was infamously called, referred to an insertion of Section 361 of the Criminal Code that meant that local journalists, Mr. Speaker, were, if deemed to be spreading misleading information, would be eligible for imprisonment to a sentence not exceeding 2 years. Anyone, including journalists, says anyone. So, Mr. Speaker, we see here that this didn't just have implications for media practitioners, but it also had implications for anyone, because it says anyone, including journalists, found guilty of spreading information that he or she knows is false and is likely to cause injury to the public interest. This is not what we are about, Mr. Speaker. What we are about, Mr. Speaker, is attempting to address a national problem which has been chronic in St. Lucia. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to improve the space, Mr. Speaker, so that we give consideration to potentially offensive language to vulnerable groups like children, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while freedom of the press and freedom of expression gives all of us the right to speak, it also does not give us the right, Mr. Speaker, to violate another person's rights. Mr. Speaker, it is interesting to know that two of the world's leading supporters of democracy and free speech and expression, the United Kingdom and the United States, have well-established broadcast commissions to protect consumers of media, especially vulnerable groups like children, from offensive media content on the public airwaves. In the case of the United Kingdom, it is the Office of Communications, and in the case of the United States, it is the Federal Communications Commissions that regulate the media. Mr. Speaker, regulation does not mean that you're about to punish the press. Regulation means, Mr. Speaker, that finally we can have an opportunity to set policy and discuss opportunities that exist for us to enhance local programming. Mr. Speaker, large sections of the St. Lucia community continue to be concerned about very little investment in local programming. Mr. Speaker, I ask the question tonight, where are the documentaries and the information on some of our iconic figures and heroes that have gone afield and made us proud? People like Walcott, people like Arthur Lewis. Mr. Speaker, if the opposition is serious about raising media standards in this country and giving the media sector its rightful place as one of the pillars upon which the development of our country can stand, Mr. Speaker, then they will join us in this initiative. And they, Mr. Speaker, will represent the facts rightfully and truthfully. It is important, Mr. Speaker, to make it abundantly clear that this administration had no input into the current bill that we found in the files. We have added nor subtracted a single line nor a single word. It is time, Mr. Speaker, to reactivate the discussion on the way forward for our media space.
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes
for our country's development to make an informed judgment on whether the various parties have reached consensus on the range of issues. Let us not be afraid to explore ways of how we can advance our country. The media is how a society talks to itself. Mr. Speaker, let's examine how we can improve our media landscape. Together, let us sit down and discuss the merits and demerits of this proposed bill. Let us be true Democrats and not shirk from our individual responsibility to raise the bar. For the media is too important for any democratic civilization to mature. Mr. Speaker, I want to take the remaining moments of my presentation to focus on some of the areas in this appropriation bill and the benefits that it will derive for my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to comment a bit on item number 41 under the head of the development of agriculture, where a total of 26,826,892 in capital projects is being proposed to be spent on the sector nationally. Mr. Speaker, naturally, being from an agricultural constituency, I give my unwavering support to this allocation, as it will no doubt improve the lives of farmers in communities like Roseau, Millet, and Munda. Agriculture revitalization programs, Mr. Speaker, will assist local farmers to better fertilize and to manage pests in their respective fields, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister of Agriculture and his department for the overwhelming support that they have given the farmers in subsidies. And I want to thank this administration for having the policy foresight to see that the agricultural sector needed that impetus and that boost. Mr. Speaker, to continue building resilience in the local farming sector, I look forward to working with the Ministry of Agriculture to enhance some of our main feeder roads in the constituency. Mr. Speaker, some of the priority feeder roads in which the discussion continues to be held with the Department of Agriculture includes the Kaipak Road in Techime, the Sarat Causeway Road, Mr. Speaker, the Inner Munda Farm Road, and the feeder road from the Delagua to Roseau Highway. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister of Agriculture for desilting already our main drains on various farms in Roseau, and I want to thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Speaker, item number 43 under the head Department of Infrastructure proposes to spend a capital allotment of 51,226,699, which seeks to improve our roadways, Mr. Speaker, island-wide, giving our citizens much needed relief in some of the areas. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would like to say thanks to the Department of Infrastructure for the Roseau to Varna Rehabilitation Road Project. Mr. Speaker, what a beautiful picture on the screen. And this shows, Mr. Speaker, that recent initiatives by our government to implement the gas tax is actually bearing tremendous fruit. Mr. Speaker, this is the first time since the building of the John Compton Dam that this road has received this level of attention. Mr. Speaker, the community of Munda, where it passes through, is usually a forgotten community. And Mr. Speaker, this road sends a clear signal to the people of Munda and to the people of Millet and to the people of Varna that we are serious about their development and we're serious about the development of this constituency. And so thanks to the Minister of Infrastructure. I want to also thank him in advance for looking at roads in St. Lawrence and looking at roads in Masque and looking at roads from Varna to Techime. And I want to thank the Minister for a very positive response to those undertakings so that we can look at strategically evaluating and upgrading the road infrastructure throughout the constituency. Mr. Speaker, please allow me, Mr. Speaker, to thank the Minister and his team for improvements to the Varna, Techime, St. Lawrence, Masque, and Ottawa roads as well. Mr. Speaker, I want to also highlight item number 47, Head Department Planning, where a capital budget of $13,915,601 was allocated. Mr. Speaker, under this department, I want to thank the Minister for his kindness in kindly agreeing, Mr. Speaker, to acquire lands for the people of Anslavady so that they can build a basketball court, Mr. Speaker. This is a constituency, Mr. Speaker, the region of Canaries, that have voted the St. Lucia Labour Party for many, many years. And contrary to what they say, that we discriminate and we victimize, Mr. Speaker, we didn't do that. What we did is we came in and we said that these young people are playing sports, not on a primary roadway, but they were playing sports on the West Coast Highway. God forbid, Mr. Speaker, that something did not happen to the young people of Anslavady who were playing football on the roads, the highways and the byways. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to announce tonight that the Ministry of Planning has agreed to acquire lands, 1 acre of land in the location that we will be putting a multi-purpose court for the development of sport for the first time in history for the people of Anslavady. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to comment on the allocation made under the head of Equity, Social Justice, Empowerment, and Human Services, a capital budget, Mr. Speaker, of $12,936,384. Mr. Speaker, I want to comment on this allocation. For as many programs enlisted in this amount will engender a sense of renewal and hope and transformation in our people. Mr. Speaker, I would like the people of Roseau to know that the Minister has already approved much needed expenditure to improve the public sanitation facility, which has been partly out of commission. Congratulations to the people of Roseau for their successful completion of the public laundry facility with the assistance of the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, or the SSDF. And so, Mr. Minister, this is a work in progress, but I'm just letting you in advance, I'll be knocking on your door very soon. Mr. Speaker, the entire country will benefit from the policy direction set forth by this administration. In the next financial year, under item 56 under head Ministry of Economic Development, we have some $71,805,909 allocated. Mr. Speaker, 19,000 have been allocated for the Constituency Development Program, which has made sufficient headway in the development and building a number of infrastructural programs in the constituency of Ancillary and Canaries. Mr. Speaker, some of these projects would include 2 major concrete roads in Ottawa, Ancillary. Mr. Speaker, 1 concrete road built in Mascray, Ancillary, Mr. Speaker, where the residents there were replacing vehicular parts on a regular basis. Mr. Speaker, there's another concrete road built in the Blackstone, Jackmill area. There's one in Monsiezo area. There's also another concrete road in Munda, and also another concrete road built in the Upper Vanna area by the Dario family. Mr. Speaker, as this financial year is about to commence, Mr. Speaker, some $26 million is also made under this program for the implementation of the DVRP, or the Disaster Vulnerability Program. Projects from this initiative will also benefit my constituency tremendously, as this administration
Honorable Member, you have 5 minutes left.
Seeks to address very important issues of slope destabilization, flooding areas with drainage, and other resilient infrastructure projects needed. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I am very, very supportive of this bill, and contrary to what is being said and spewed by the opposition, claims of victimization, claims, Mr. Speaker, that we are uncaring, and claims that we are visionless, Mr. Speaker, I have to debunk them. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that while we have not arrived to the ultimate destination of building a new and advanced and 21st century St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, I want to make it absolutely clear that we are well in our way. Employment is up, Mr. Speaker. The economy is growing, Mr. Speaker, and the debt is being managed. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to working for the people of St. Lucia, and we will do everything, Mr. Speaker, that we have to ensure that cheap politics will not prevail. Mr. Speaker, the other thing is, I want to support, Mr. Speaker, previous announcements in this House that we will investigate every single sign of irregularity that was seen by the previous administration. It is time the nation knows about the Jafali affair. It is time the nation knows why there were 4 Jafali passports. And it is time the nation knows, Mr. Speaker, why was there a description of an account called the minister's account. Mr. Speaker, these are gross violations of good governance, transparency, accountability, this United Workers' Party administration. It is not about a vehicle. It is not about a Range Rover. It is really about accountability. We are not singling out anybody. This is not a political witch hunt. We are also asking the former Prime Minister to break his silence on Grindberg. The silence is deafening in the corridors of this House, and we are committed. We're so committed, Mr. Speaker, that we have changed the act of the Crown Prosecutions Proceedings Act, where, Mr. Speaker, we are saying that the act, a section of that act, will not, as it relates to the financial, as it relates to returning funds, public funds to the government, that is not statute bar, and there's no statute of limitations. And so, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. I support those investigations. It is time that we get serious about irregularities, Mr. Speaker, and it is time we get serious about transparency and accountability. They are not just a statement or a phrase that you use for an election campaign. We must show commitment to them, and we must ensure, Honorable Member, Mr. Speaker, sorry, we must ensure that we do everything we can to keep our country clean of corruption, because corruption robs our country, Mr. Speaker, of much needed funds to invest in education, to invest in the youth, to invest in our playing fields. And so wherever there are any signs of irregularities, Mr. Speaker, I place myself on the cross. Crucify me if I am ever guilty. But for now, Mr. Speaker, we're investigating those issues, and it has my 100% support. I thank you, and I support this bill.
Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives, and member for Soufrière Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give support to the 2018-2019 Appropriation Bill presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, member for Mikud South. Mr. Speaker, my contribution today will speak on the policies of this government in building resiliency today to secure our future. I will also elaborate on the policies and programs within the Department of Physical Planning, and I shall share with the people of Soufrière Fonseca my plans for the constituency. Mr. Speaker, before I comment on the bill, permit me to thank God Almighty for his blessings and mercies and for giving me the strength to be here today. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank my family, friends, team members for their relentless support and partnership in delivering the transformation that we promised to the people of Soufrière. And that is a job I take very seriously, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to congratulate the Prime Minister for crafting such a resilient-oriented budget for 2018-2019. A budget, Mr. Speaker, designed to foster growth and national development, and at the same time, keeping to the government's social responsibility in providing safety nets to the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the theme for this year's budget, Building Resiliency Today to Secure Our Future, is very fitting for our country at this point in time. Because, Mr. Speaker, today it is a time where nationalist ideologies are prominent around the world, especially amongst developed countries. And the ideological message, Mr. Speaker, is every country for itself. And we in St. Lucia, small islands like us, no longer enjoy preferential treatments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is also a time when we are at the mercy of disastrous impacts of climate change. It is evident, Mr. Speaker, that natural disasters have become more frequent and more severe. And last year's hurricane season was a perfect example, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we as small island developing states with no natural resources must build a resilient economy if we are to survive those external influences. Mr. Speaker, As the Prime Minister alluded in his presentation, 4 critical components are essential to build the resilience needed to secure our future. Resilience in our human development, resilience in building our physical infrastructure, resilience of a more efficient and productive public sector, and resilience in our debt management. Mr. Speaker, how do we build resilience in human development, in infrastructure, in public sector reform, in debt management, Mr. Speaker? The only way we can do so, Mr. Speaker, is to grow this economy. We have to grow the economy, Mr. Speaker, to give us the latitude to develop our people. We need to grow the economy, Mr. Speaker, to give us the latitude to build a resilient infrastructure in this country. And we need to grow the economy, Mr. Speaker, to reform the public sector. And to grow the economy, Mr. Speaker, we have to bring our debt under control. We have to practice fiscal prudence, Mr. Speaker. And it means that any borrowing we are going to do, it must come with its own revenue stream. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that after our first fiscal budget, that this government, the workers on this side of the Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, have proven that we are ready and prepared to build resiliency today for the future of Fair Helen. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, we have to put things in perspective. And Mr. Speaker, to put things in perspective, we have to take a drive back to memory lane. We have to go back to memory lane, Mr. Speaker. And memory lane, Mr. Speaker, is going to take us back to 2016, June the 6th, 2016. And June the 6th, 2016, Mr. Speaker, memory lane will reveal to us the abundance of maladies and ailments that this government inherited from the St. Lucia Labour Party. And Mr. Speaker, some of those maladies are, 1, 3 years of negative growth, Mr. Speaker. An economy in contraction, Mr. Speaker. Stagnant. An economy where the private sector had no confidence, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment of over 24%, Mr. Speaker, and approximately 44% amongst the youth. A dilapidated infrastructure network throughout the length and breadth of this country, Mr. Speaker. A demoralized police force. No DPP, Mr. Speaker. A forensic lab closed. School plans not conducive to learning, Mr. Speaker. Healthcare at its lowest, 2016. Those, Mr. Speaker, are some of the ailments that this government of workers inherited on June the 6th, 2016. Mr. Speaker, with the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister and the team of workers on this side of the House, we have grown this economy by 2.5% and we have reduced employment by 4%, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I am proud to be part of this team of workers on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, we know the members on the opposite side would always doubt the figures, doubt the report, doubt the growth. But we understand that that is the nature of the opposition. But the irony of it, Mr. Speaker, is that this estimates of revenue and expenditure, this economic and social review, the growth of 2.5%, the 4% reduction in unemployment, Mr. Speaker, was prepared by the units of budget and policy at the Ministry of Finance. 2 units, budget and research and policy. This is the same unit, those 2 units, Mr. Speaker, for decades have been preparing estimates and social and economic review for budget. Those same units, Mr. Speaker, they prepared the estimates of revenue and social and economic review for the members opposite for the past 15 years. But today, because of cheap politics, trying to play the game of convenience, they are doubting the figures. Hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker. Hypocrisy. So they are telling us that they have no confidence in the public servants at the Department of Finance who prepared the Economic and Social Review and the estimates of revenue.
When it's not convenient.
When it is not convenient to them, when they are on this opposite side of the house. They get all flaws with the numbers, Mr. Speaker. It is typical Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, resisting resilience. Typical Labour Party. But, Mr. Speaker, today we are not in this honorable house to rejoice and celebrate the numbers, the growth and the reduction in unemployment. Those numbers, Mr. Speaker, gives us a clear indication that this government of workers have put the country in the right direction. We are heading in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. We are cognizant of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that 2.5% growth at this time will not impact every St. Lucian. But this, Mr. Speaker, is a motivation for the men and women on this side of the house to double the growth in this economy. We have to use it as motivation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with all the ailments we inherited in 2016, not even the great Houdini would have been able to achieve 2.5% growth and 4% unemployment reduction. Not even the great Houdini would have done it, Mr. Speaker. But the men and women on this side of the Honorable House were able to do it. Mr. Speaker, the opposition's economic policy was all about overtaxation of the people.
Yes.
And the evidence was there for all of us to see. And all of us felt it, Mr. Speaker. What did we get from them, Mr. Speaker? 15% VAT, the oppressive tax on the people. They promised $100 million in 3 months. VAT generated almost $300 million a year. So instead of giving $100 million, they took $300 million out of the pockets of the people, Mr. Speaker. For over 4 years, VAT netted over $1 billion. What do they have to show St. Lucians for that?
Answer that.
Over 60% increase in over 60% increase in water for dredging the dam, Mr. Speaker. Over 4 years, the dam was not dredged. Mr. Speaker, increase in license fees. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the road infrastructure remain in the worst of conditions. Increase in passport fees. Was there more efficiency? No. Did they decentralize the service to the south? No. They know the answer. Increase in fuel storage on Lusilek, causing the cost of electricity to rise. Overtaxation of the people, Mr. Speaker. This government of the workers, we promised the people of St. Lucia 5 to stay alive. Mr. Speaker, reduction in VAT by 2.5%. 50% reduction of the increase in vehicle license fees imposed by the members opposite. Mr. Speaker, an increase in the school feeding and school transportation subsidies. Amnesty on hospital fees, Mr. Speaker. And the suspension of personal property tax for a period of 5 years. All promised, Mr. Speaker, all delivered, and we still grew the economy by 2.5% and reduced unemployment by 4%. Remember, Mr. Speaker, they talk about the gas. $1.50 on gas tax. But, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for Cashews North, now I shall call him the Minister of Works. He showed it. Here it is. Works, all over. Every single page you turn works. From the gas money, the 150. And at the rate that he's going, Mr. Speaker, by this time next year, he will have to buy out an entire newspaper edition to feature the works of this government. Mr. Speaker, this gas tax has resulted in major improvements in our road rehabilitation program and create major cost savings for motorists in parts, wear and tear, mechanical services. So this tax of $1.50, Mr. Speaker, is worth it for this country. And Mr. Speaker, they are opposing this tax because they want to continue the freeness in this country. They want to continue freeness. Because when they continue freeness in this country, they are going to have a chokehold on the people of this country to control them for political expediency, Mr. Speaker. We're not about this on this side of the House. We empower people, Mr. Speaker. We empower our people. And Mr. Speaker, tonight, I want to implore the words of JFK when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What you can do for your country. And we as St. Lucians have to be able to partake in the development of this country. And if it means we need good roads, we need resilient infrastructure, we need to contribute the $1.50 tax to building resilient infrastructure in this country, Mr. Speaker. We're not about freeness. We all have to partake in the development of this country, grow this economy. Mr. Speaker, we go to the ADT tax. A tax which was presented by the workers. When they came in, they took it out. We had already collected almost $50 million. Where's the money? They talk about PPP. After 4.5 years, PPP. Where's the airport? Where's the Chaye? Where is the Chaye? We have introduced ADT, and the people of the South, Mr. Speaker, they are going to get a world-class international airport, which is going to be the premier airport in the Eastern Caribbean. And we are starting construction of the airport by August of this year, Mr. Speaker. Guaranteed. Mr. Speaker, it's amazing and sometimes scary to listen to the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, speak on economic and fiscal management. Very scary to hear them speak on economic management, fiscal policy. Those same members, Mr. Speaker, 20 months ago, they were on this side of the House. Why are you all over there today? If you all know so much, if you all are economic gurus, if you all are economic wizards, why are you all on this side of the House today? Why? Mr. Speaker, when you listen to the member for Castries, is the leader of the opposition. It's a pity he's not there right now. It's a pity. Now he has the answers to everything. He knows all. But he was the commander, he was the second in command for the past 15 years. So I want to ask the member for Castries East, where was he for the past 15 years when his government was implementing their failed economic policies?
Where were you?
Where was he? Wasn't he part of the cabinet? Wasn't he part of the decision making? Where was he, Mr. Speaker? And today, Mr. Speaker, when I listen to the member for Castries East and the leader of the opposition, I listen to his predecessor. He sounds like his predecessor. Membet Mempwell. Two of the same. It is all recycling of failed economic policies, Mr. Speaker. That's all we get from him. Nothing new to the table, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tonight, we on this side of the House want to let the members opposite know that they are not in the league of economic advisors. They're not in that league yet, Mr. Speaker. They're not in that league. Because the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, here he comes.
You're running, man. You're running.
The members opposite, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, they have been tried, they have been tested, and they have failed. So we do not need them to advise us on economic matters, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you look on this side of the House, what you see fresh blood. you see creativity, you see innovation, you see experience, Mr. Speaker, and you see vision. Men and women of vision. Speaking of vision, Mr. Speaker, it had to take the members opposite 15 years to put a vision commission together. And I don't even think that vision commission completed its work.
They have no vision.
15 years to put a vision commission together. But Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the house crafted a vision for this country since 2013, early 2014. The workers crafted a vision.
Now they're trying to put division.
A vision to provide globally competitive education, affordable quality healthcare, public safety, and economic security for every St. Lucian, Mr. Speaker. That was crafted in 2013, 2014, before we came into office. And it is on the premise of this vision, Mr. Speaker, today we are building resilience for the future. And we are seeing the results. 2.5% growth, 4% reduction in unemployment. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the opposition, you look at their demeanor, you look at the actions, the temperament, you can see anger in them. They're upset. They're bitter, Mr. Speaker. Bitter at the defeat in the polls on June 6, 2016. They're still bitter, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as a result of the bitterness, they are hell-bent on political mischief, lies, propaganda, chaos, and an attempt to destabilize this government and this country, Mr. Speaker. That is what we have in the opposition. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite believe that they have an entitlement to the governance of this country. That's true. They believe they have an entitlement to this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, none of us have an entitlement to the governance of this country or this honorable house. We are given that privilege by the people, Mr. Speaker. We are given that privilege. And we on this side of the house accept that privilege with honor and humility, Mr. Speaker. And the power, we know the power is always in the hands of the people. And the people used that power on June 6, 2016 and put them on the opposite side of the house. And Mr. Speaker, this is where they are going to stay for a very long time, Mr. Speaker. Because the workers are at work. The workers have started growing this economy, reducing employment. And we are going to continue to do that job, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if there is one thing, Mr. Speaker, that we on this side of the honorable house know, Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing we know, is that before politics, there was life. And after politics, there will be life. So we have no entitlement to governance, no entitlement to the house. We are serving with honor and humility and getting the job done. The job that the people put us in to get done, that is what we are getting done.
Skin in the game.
Mr. Speaker, I need to respond to the leader of the opposition on his statement of friends, family, and foreigners.
Whoa.
When he attacked this government, the Honorable Prime Minister. But I want to remind the leader of the opposition that it has been tradition in this country to protect a particular part of the tourism sector, a particular part of that service sector with the boaters and the taxi drivers, the tour operators. This is an area in the sector, Mr. Speaker, which is protected for locals. But we have to ask the leader of the opposition, why was it that a particular hotelier was given the license, the permit, to operate a boat, a power cat, and vehicles to compete with locals in that sector? A foreign hotelier. under the government of the Labour Party, the last administration.
Where was that hotel, in Marshall?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if he had the taste of hams and turkeys in his mouth when they gave it. I don't know if that was the reason why they gave it. Maybe they've been eating too much ham and turkey, so they had to give it. I'm serious. Mr. Speaker, the member is talking about this government not encouraging entrepreneurship, local investment. But Mr. Speaker, who closed SLDB and who reopened SLDB? Which government closed SLDB? The bank for the farmers, the fishermen, the bakers, the small businessmen, and which government in 2008 reopened SLDB? Do your research, honorable member.
He's an accountant, he knows.
Mr. Speaker, the United Workers' Party, under the most difficult circumstances, have always cleaned up the economic mess of the Labour Party. Always. And we on this side of the House, we are ready and willing to get that job done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I need to let the members opposite know that under the leadership of this Honorable Prime Minister, the workers on this side of the House will remain steadfast and resolute in our quest in building the resilient economy that is needed to build this new St. Lucia. We are going to remain steadfast and resolute in that quest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that with the projected growth this year in the world economy, the continued increase in tourist arrivals to our shores, the many infrastructural projects to be undertaken this financial year, growth of the construction and manufacturing sectors, and recovery of agriculture post-tropical storm Matthew will lead us to record continued growth in this economy and put St. Lucia back on track as the leading economy in the Eastern Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, permit me at this time to speak on some critical considerations that the Department of Physical Planning will have to undertake in this financial year, 2018-2019. As a department, Mr. Speaker, we provide strategic interventions, policy guidance and direction, professional and technical advice, and in some cases, project management support as it pertains to sustainable administration and management of lands in St. Lucia. In order to effectively and efficiently carry out that mandate, Mr. Speaker, one of the main supporting pillars of the department is an updated legislative framework that reflects modern practices. Mr. Speaker, since coming in office, we have recognized that there are several pieces of outdated legislations and the absence of policies that inhibited and in some cases frustrated approval processes and the government's ability to fast-track the administration's development agenda. Mr. Speaker, I have instructed my team to undertake a comprehensive review of the following pieces of legislation that will, on one hand, strengthen the regulatory framework to make it more relevant, and on the other, improve the procedures and processes where necessary to enhance the ease of doing business. Mr. Speaker, the legislative review agenda will include the following: Physical Planning and Development Act, Chapter 5.12, OECS Building Code, Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 5.04, Land Surveyors Act, Chapter 5.07, Land Registration Act, Chapter 5.01, Crown Lands Act, Chapter 5.02, Architects Registration Act, number 11 of 2005. These reviews will include inter alia identification, removal or updating of outdated and conflicting provisions, and the introduction of new provisions that may be required to meet all anticipated scenarios. Mr. Speaker, for example, the fee structure as it relates to Land Registration Act is outdated. The approved fee structure typically dates back to 1984, but the cost of operations today far exceeded what was charged back in 1984. If we take a look at the land administration program, Mr. Speaker, the total revenue approved for the last financial year, 2017-2018, was $1,250,255, as compared to the cost of operations in that same period of $3,652,581. It is imperative, Mr. Speaker, that we review these tariffs, amongst others, to guide the government on the most appropriate recommendations that can be adopted. With regard to policy areas, Mr. Speaker, these will include, but not limited to, Development Control Authority, the DCA. Mr. Speaker, during the front speech by the Governor General, he would have alluded to a policy shift in the management of the Development Control Authority. It's government's intention, Mr. Speaker, to provide the most robust mechanism to support sustainable development through an effective and efficient modality. To this end, a policy shift, Mr. Speaker, will recognize the empowerment of the DCA as an independent body corporate with the authority and control for all development within St. Lucia resting with the board of the DCA. In order to effect this change, the following actions will be required. Legislative amendments to the Physical Planning and Development Act, number 29, 2001, with subsequent revision, 2005. The establishment of governance and operational structures for the DCA to effectively carry out its mandate in accordance with the new legislative changes. The physical relocation of the DCA away from the Department of Physical Planning to reinforce the need for independence. And a review of the current fee structure to ensure that the necessary financial resources are available for the effective operational functioning of the DCA. The empowerment, Mr. Speaker, of the Department of Physical Planning through revised legislation and resourcing to ensure that priority focus is given to the development of a policy framework for land use. So the department, the unit Physical Planning, their focus shall be policy, and the DCA will control the regulation and enforcement of land developments, Mr. Speaker. Derived from this policy will be the establishment of a land use classification scheme and land zoning plans for the country. These policy guidelines will provide the DCA with the regulatory basis for decision-making and will serve to streamline and simplify specific application requirements such as EIA, Environmental Impact Assessments. The creation, Mr. Speaker, of an online electronic application platform for the integration of all required stakeholders and effective management of the development application process. Land policy. Mr. Speaker, a land policy is typically a relationship between people and access to land. But because we have limited resource, it is of paramount importance that we manage the resource in the most conducive manner, keeping in mind all the economic, political, social, and environmental issues that comes with it. We have engaged the World Bank to provide technical assistance to move the process forward. And Cabinet will be briefed on the next steps, Mr. Speaker, as government is committed to ensuring at the very earliest an approved revised national land policy. Land use plan. Mr. Speaker, once the revised national land policy has been adopted, we need to move speedily on the development of a national land use plan. Land use planning seeks to regulate the uses of land in the most effective and efficient manner to ensure the greatest benefits are achieved. Mr. Speaker, it is the government's intention to undertake a comprehensive assessment of our lands to determine the best or alternative uses to maximize both the economic and social benefits to its people. Land use planning ensures future uses of these limited resources. Building code policy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in acknowledgement of the value of a resilient build sector at all levels of the economy, to every individual and community, the government has been seeking to develop and support the application of a building code that is relevant to the island and adequately mitigates risk to natural hazards and results in design and construction that is safe and economical to users and owners alike. Mr. Speaker, a review of the existing building code is being undertaken by the OECS Commission and entails a review of models for the administration of development control systems across the region and the globe, and an assessment of the adequacy for implementing national building codes within OECS member states. And Mr. Speaker, all the major stakeholders in the construction and associate sectors have been engaged in this endeavor. Major project initiatives of the department, Mr. Speaker: digitization of the land registry. Mr. Speaker, when we last met in this honorable house during the debate of estimates of revenue and expenditure, I did indicate that I would provide a methodology in bringing this project to fruition. A department of such critical importance of land administration and management, Mr. Speaker, that affects every aspect of commerce and industry, including the very lives of every St. Lucian, and the project to digitize its operations to achieve greater efficiency cannot be allowed to fail. This is important, Mr. Speaker, particularly with the loss we suffered at the Folk Research Center. Should this, God forbid, take place at the land registry, this would be devastating. To this end, government will be identifying all available resources to bring this project to a completion. Mr. Speaker, the benefits to be derived from this digitization process will include, but not limited to, quicker turnaround time in the processing of documents, reduced waiting times at the land registry, online service application processes, safeguard of the land documents, potential revenue increase, modernization of St. Lucia geodetic network, Mr. Speaker. The main objective of this project is to modernize the existing geodetic network system that allow for the streamlining and modernization of related survey, land development, and land administrative processes. Additionally, this project would facilitate and strengthen our Geographic Information System, GIS, initiative. Towards the end of this project, Mr. Speaker, the government of St. Lucia would now be able to share information on GPS positions, heights, and other fields such as tidal movement, climate change, flood mapping, earth movement, etc. This system would also provide a more stable framework for precise surveying data to users of the network. Mr. Speaker, another important component is geospatial data. This is a critical asset in effective decision-making. After occurrences such as Hurricane Thomas and a number of others, climate change-induced adverse events, the government of St. Lucia recognized that the resilience of our fragile economy is dependent upon the efficient coordination, management, and ease of access to the right data and information, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I shall now turn on to constituency matters. And the constituency of Soufrière-Fonsac, Mr. Speaker, despite the loyalty to the Labour Party for the past 20 years, have been neglected and taken for granted for too long. Mr. Speaker, 2018 onward shall be a defining period in the holistic development of the constituency. Mr. Speaker, we will start with the community of Bouton. And Mr. Speaker, it is my intention to start works on 2 roads below the Bouton School. We may not be able to finish them, but we are going to start the roads below the Bouton School. Also, Mr. Speaker, there is a need to install street lights from Katchime all the way to Bouton, because this road is very dark, Mr. Speaker, and usually at nights, persons coming from Castries or Soufrière to Bouton have to walk in the darkness all the way down to Bouton. So we are looking at placing street lights from Katchime to Bouton. Also, Mr. Speaker, in Bouton, we are going to do a complete rehabilitation of the community center with a new concrete floor and works around the facade and the ceiling of the Bouton Community Center. I am also very pleased in the coming months, Mr. Speaker, under the BNTF program, the residents of Bouton will have constant water supply to their homes. And I want to thank the CDB and SSDF for this project. Mr. Speaker, we are also looking on the BNTF 9 to get allocation so that we can get the water down to Colombet for the businesses and residents in the Colombet area. Mr. Speaker, under the comprehensive program of the Ministry of Infrastructure, as outlined by the Prime Minister, I look forward to the complete rehabilitation of the new development roads this financial year, both the upper and the lower roads, Mr. Speaker. This is my priority road this financial year, Mr. Speaker, and I will not take no for an answer from the Minister of Works on this allocation, Mr. Speaker. For over 30 years, the people of Soufrière, people of new development have been waiting for these roads to be fixed, and we are going to repair all the roads at new development this financial year, Mr. Speaker.
His predecessor,
Mr. Speaker, to my wonderful people of Zeno, I look forward to begin the acquisition of the lands to build a court at Zeno for the young people. We started that process back in 2011. The Labour Party came into office. They never even looked at Zeno, Mr. Speaker. But we love the people of Zeno. We love the people of Soufrière. And this government is going to acquire that land and build a court for the young people of Zeno, Mr. Speaker. Also, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue with additional drainage and footpath works throughout the Zeno community. There is need, Mr. Speaker, for the desilting of the river at Ravinclay and drainage works near Tima and Anne-Marie to safeguard against runoffs from uphill. Mr. Speaker, we have commenced drainage and access works throughout Fort Saint-Jacques under the CDP program. I look forward to undertake additional drainage and footpath works at St. Philip, construction of main drain at Mini, and this is a main drain which is passing near Miss Claire and ending near the Alexander family at Mini. Drainage and access works will be continued at Tibuk, Lakuan, and Belvedere, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there's a Tibuk there. Mr. Speaker, I have identified funding through the SSDF for construction of washroom and changing room facilities at the multipurpose court at Fort Saint-Jacques. This facility will be constructed below the court, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I look forward for assistance for the following feeder roads in Fort Saint-Jacques: the River Doré Massige Road and the Edmond Forest Road. Very critical roads for our farmers at Fort Saint-Jacques, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also look forward to partner with the SRDF and the Fort Saint-Jacques Development Committee to formalize and operate the Abasso Trail to create sustainable employment for the young people of Fort Saint-Jacques. I am pleased to report, Mr. Speaker, of the clearance of over a decade-long land slippage between Esperance and Diamond, now making the road motorable to Fort Saint-Jacques as an alternative route. But at the moment, Mr. Speaker, it is mainly four-wheel drive vehicles who can access it. And it is our intention to develop, to rehabilitate this road in phases from Esperance into Diamond. But we are looking forward, Mr. Speaker, this financial year to at least rehabilitate the road from the Boaden Junction down to the last house at the bottom of Esperance where Tony lives. Mr. Speaker, we recently concluded drainage and access works at Belfond, Boaden, and Chateau-Belair, and these works will be continued this financial year. Mr. Speaker, I have also made a request to the Ministry of Infrastructure for the installation of a Bailey Bridge at Deville for the residents of Deville, Font-Jean-Libre, Montlacroix, and even from the constituency of Choiseul, Delcey, La Pointe, and Industry, who use this road to get to Soufrière and other places, Mr. Speaker. In the interim, there is an old pedestrian bridge. We have awarded a contract, again under the CDP, and within the next week or two, they are going to start work on repairs to that pedestrian bridge so that the people no longer have to walk through the river to cross. Mr. Speaker, there will be the slabbing of drains leading to the Gros Piton Trail at Font-Jean-Libre, as this poses a hazard for emergency response and patrons of the trail. Also, Mr. Speaker, this financial year, we are looking into constructing a road from the Font-Jean-Libre entrance to Montlacroix for the people of Montlacroix. Mr. Speaker, we will continue footpaths for the residents at Sulphur Springs and the road access into Laku of Sulphur Springs. As we add Sulphur Springs, Mr. Speaker, there will be a major upgrade to the Sulphur Springs Park. This financial year, there will be the construction of at least 3 additional pools for the black water at the Sulphur Springs. And already, Mr. Speaker, we are in talks to construct a world-class spa at the park, add value to the Sulphur Springs Park, Mr. Speaker. Down to Soufrière, Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to the continuation of the desilting of the Soufrière River. And we are looking forward for this year for an expansion of the desilting program to Fonkako and even in the Creston area. Because you know, Mr. Speaker, anytime the river overflows its banks, the Wingsville area is threatened. So we need to desilt early, and I'm calling on the Minister of Works for some additional allocation to the silting of the Soufrière River. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'm making a plea to the Minister of Economic Development, where we have the DVRP for the flood mitigation works to be done at the Soufrière River, where we are going to raise the river wall, where we are also looking at continuation of a main drain at Palmis, and also the drain behind the St. Dominic Salvius Boys School to mitigate against flooding in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. And of course, Mr. Speaker, I am looking forward to assistance with repairs to the schools in Soufrière. Soufrière Primary School, we need to do some repairs to the washrooms there, the library, also some repairs to the Soufrière Infant, the Special Ed, Les Etats Combined, Soufrière Comprehensive, Français Jacques Primary, all the schools in Soufrière Bouton, they all are in need of repairs, and I'm looking forward to getting some assistance, no matter how small it is, to have some rehabilitation works on those schools. 20 years of neglect. There's so much to be done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Member, you have 15 minutes in which to complete your...
We now move to the heartbeat of Sulphur City. The heartbeat of Sulphur City, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I seek your indulgence and honorable members of this House to make a presentation on our holistic development plan that this government have for the complete transformation of the town. And it is our hope, Mr. Speaker, that when we are through with this development of Soufrière Town, Sulphur City, Soufrière shall once again be called the Eden of the Caribbean. And the people of Soufrière will be proud to say that they are from the Mecca of tourism, the breadbasket of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I now move on to the Hummingbird Beach project. Mr. Speaker, this was a project conceptualized in 2010 and started in 2011 under a United Workers' Party government. And this was a project, Mr. Speaker, the Hummingbird Beach Park facility, that was supposed to create new entrepreneurs in Soufrière. Vendors, the taxi drivers, the water taxi operators, new bar owners, new restaurant owners, new spa, new boutique owners. But unfortunately, not a single block was laid between 2011 and 2016 at Hummingbird Beach, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud, Mr. Speaker. I'm excited with the fact that we have started the project. It's already in completion, and you can see, Mr. Speaker, works are going on at Hummingbird right now, and it is due for completion by the middle of May. And we are hoping, Mr. Speaker, to have an official opening of Hummingbird Beach vending facility in June. Mr. Speaker, we now move on to Old Trafford redevelopment. And if we look on the screen, Mr. Speaker, you could see how Old Trafford looks at the moment. And when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, the previous administration had a plan just to put a concrete slab over Old Trafford for buses to park, and on a Saturday for vendors to sell on that concrete. Mr. Speaker, we believe that Old Trafford must be an economic hub for Soufrière. That's right. It entails all the core sectors, tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, to generate sustainable development, Mr. Speaker, and improve the infrastructure of the town. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the new concept for Old Trafford development, Mr. Speaker. And this is a view of the market. This is where we're going to have the market in Soufriere, the farmers market, where our vendors who have suffered for over 20 years under the governance of the Labour Party, the representation, sorry, of the Labour Party, are going to now get some solace with this new market where they are going to be underneath the market, away from the sun, the rain, the dust, and all of that, Mr. Speaker. And you could see, Mr. Speaker, the concept we have kept to the history of the town. We have kept the French architecture in place. So there you have the market, Mr. Speaker, and the building you see to the right is going to be a butcher shop. So where the butchers are going to have all the equipment and so on for the fresh meats on a Saturday. This is another view from the bridge, from Bridge Street of Old Trafford, Mr. Speaker. There's another view of it. There's another view, and there you are seeing the new Soufriere Craft Market. We had a craft market which got damaged in 1999, I believe, by Tropical Storm Lenny, and we've never rebuilt it. So on the side of Old Trafford, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have a new craft market. We are going to have restaurants, we're going to have bars, we are going to have boutiques, we are going to have duty-free shops, and all of that on Old Trafford playing field, Mr. Speaker. Definitely, Madam Minister. Mr. Speaker, still opposite Old Trafford, we have the old Town Hall building, Mr. Speaker. We have the old Town Hall building. This old Town Hall building, that's the Town Hall. Very dilapidated condition. It has been closed down for years. 20 years. It's been closed down, Mr. Speaker. And now we have a new concept, a new building coming right there to replace the Town Hall, Mr. Speaker. And this building, Mr. Speaker, this is going to be the new Soufriere Administrative Building. This building, Mr. Speaker, of course, will not be built on the eve of elections. It will not be built on the eve of elections. We are going to get all the necessary planning approvals, and the land will be properly vested, Mr. Speaker. Okay? This building, Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this building is that we want the Town Hall building, the administrative building, that's what they did, to Vieux-Fort, to be a one-stop shop for government services, Mr. Speaker. So we are going to bring the post office there, the courthouse. We are going to have the office of the mayor, the parliamentary representative in there. We are going to bring in different government offices because we want to decentralize, Mr. Speaker. So I am going to be in talks. That's right. I am going to be in talks with the Minister for Transport so that we can have a sub-office in Soufriere. We have free driving schools in Soufriere, Mr. Speaker. And I'm certainly sure we can make arrangements where maybe once a week, once a fortnight, where we can have exams in Soufriere for the people of Soufriere. Because this administrative building, Mr. Speaker, the purpose is not only to serve Soufriere, but to serve Canaries and to serve Choiseul as well, Mr. Speaker. That's right. And Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to building this administrative building under a bolt agreement, Mr. Speaker. Okay. We continue, Mr. Speaker, to Maurice Mason Street, Waterfront Promenade. Oh yes, still. And this is what the view of transformation of Soufriere, Mr. Speaker. Okay. So from the Old Trafford, Mr. Speaker, this is what the waterfront is going to be like, Mr. Speaker. A promenade, pedestrianize it. There is going to be controlled vehicular access on the waterfront. And you could see, Mr. Speaker, we have kept to the history of the town with the French architecture of the buildings on the waterfront, Mr. Speaker. Yep. Okay, there's this another view of the waterfront, Mr. Speaker. We have some additional pics. Okay, this is Soufriere waterfront. This is going to be the new Soufriere waterfront, the transformation, Mr. Speaker. We still have some more. And this one, Mr. Speaker, I want you to pay very close attention to this one, the Soufriere police station. So this is going to be the design of the new Soufriere police station, Mr. Speaker. And we are starting the redesign, the construction of that Soufriere police station within a few weeks. This, Mr. Speaker, is going to be financed by the Soufriere Regional Development Foundation. So I want to thank the Supra Foundation for that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we now move on. We now move on to the New Development Recreational Park. The people of New Development, they are going to get the roads this year. I'm looking forward to next financial year to construct this first park at New Development, Mr. Speaker. And this park is going to be on a 22,819 square feet of community recreational space. And this park, Mr. Speaker, is going to be, you could see the site right now. It's a green space. This is right next to Mr. Fauché, Ms. Asinia. And this is what we are looking forward to building right there at New Development, Mr. Speaker. A recreational park for the people, for the children, the elderly, the retirees at New Development in the next financial year, Mr. Speaker. Also at New Development, Mr. Speaker, we have a second park, and this park is going to be next to the Fedo's restaurant, Mr. Speaker. And this park is going to be a sports recreational area designated for community fitness activities and overall outdoor recreation, Mr. Speaker, for users of all ages. So if we continue the slide, Mr. Speaker, you will see this is next to Fedo's. Okay, this is how the site looks at the moment, Mr. Speaker. And now we have the new design. This park, Mr. Speaker, it is designed in such a way that the residents could jog around the park because it's a very long piece of property, so they can jog, they can run, and we are going to have heavy equipment, heavy gym equipment on the outdoors where they could exercise as well, gym and aerobic equipment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we now move to Fontbenier Park. And this park, Mr. Speaker, is right in the backyard of my predecessor. A park which has not been given any attention. Again, 20 years, nothing. It had to take a Peace Corps volunteer to do fundraising together with the Lions Club many years ago to do some rehabilitation to this park, some painting and plant some flowers and trees. And today, Mr. Speaker, this is the concept for the new Fontbenier Park. For the people of Fontbenier, the elderly people at Fontbenier, for Miss Views, for Mohair, for Miss Mary to relax at the Fontbenier Park, Mr. Speaker. Misrepresentation and neglect. Mr. Speaker, we now move on to the Palmis Road vending facility. And Palmis Road vending facility, I'm speaking of the area right behind the St. Dominic Savio Boys Primary School, next to Frank's Garage. This is where we are going to be building a drain, Mr. Speaker, under the DVRP for flood mitigation, and we are going to level that area, and this is what is going to be coming in the Palmis vending facility. You could see, Mr. Speaker, we are going to put some beautiful booths there for the young people of Fontbenier Palmis to go into entrepreneurship. So, Mr. Speaker, they could open their little nail and hair salon, a barber shop, a pizzeria, cafe, whatever it is, right there on the Palmis Road vending area, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on now to the Soufra Square. Soufra Square. It's not finished yet. Mr. Speaker, there has been much talk about the Soufra Square. And this square, Mr. Speaker, was put on hold to review the works and also the design. And we have completed that process, Mr. Speaker. Works is currently going on in the square. And if you look carefully, Mr. Speaker, you could see that on Henry Belma Street, this is the street where the Viewfort bus stand is right now, is going to be pedestrianized. It's going to be pedestrianized, Mr. Speaker. It's going to be an area, you're going to have some kiosks and some other amenities. And this is an area also, Mr. Speaker, where you could have some public events, Memorial Day parades, and so on, right there on Henry Belma Street next to the square. Also in the square, Mr. Speaker, we are going to erect the Freedom Monument right there in the center of the square. This is a monument, Mr. Speaker, which has been sitting in a government warehouse for almost 20 years. And it is fitting, yes, done by Ricky George, Mr. Ricky George. So we are going to erect it right there in the center of the square, since Soufrière has the history of the brigands, the battle of the brigands, the Negmawans, Mr. Speaker. It's fitting to have this monument erected in the square in Soufrière. So I look forward to the completion of the square, Mr. Speaker, by the end of August this year, for us to have the opening of this facility.
Honorable Member, you should be winding up.
Mr. Speaker, we move over now, Mr. Speaker, to the Soufrière Mini Stadium. And I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for making this a priority in this financial year, Mr. Speaker. The young people of Soufrière are excited, the footballers are excited, and the mini stadium is going to be the temporary national stadium in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. So this is the concept of the Soufrière Mini Stadium, Mr. Speaker, where we are going to place an artificial, synthetic turf, okay, a FIFA synthetic turf, and an IAAF 400-meter track with modular grandstands on the mini stadium. We are going to do some remedial works to the washrooms, Mr. Speaker. We are going to be putting up the wall around the stadium. We are going to be putting a 25-meter Olympic-sized swimming pool on the square, on the mini stadium, sorry. So we are going to be revolutionizing sports in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in speaking about sports, we are very happy in Soufrière that 4 young persons from Soufrière, Shornasha Prevo, Claudina Constantine, Kivoy Lionel, are now enrolled at Essex County College in New Jersey, and Jazani Henry Jordan enrolled in Alabama, and Zachariah Simon enrolled in South Carolina. So 5 of them got scholarships, football scholarships, and they are currently enrolled at those universities. So with our program of sport, our training of coaches and managers and so on, I look forward to even more young persons from Soufrière getting scholarships to go to universities in the US or England, and I know this stadium is going to contribute significantly to that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is not on the slide, but the Soufrière Hospital is the next major project, which is a priority for me and for this government. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we had 2 fires within a space of 3 weeks, and the hospital had to be relocated temporarily to Lesita Wellness Center. We have gotten the okay from the police to relocate to the hospital. We are going to condemn the area that was burnt. We are going to relocate there, but we are looking forward to this year, by the end of the 2nd quarter into the 3rd quarter, to start the construction of the new Soufrière Hospital, Mr. Speaker. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I am very optimistic for the opportunities in this new financial year for St. Lucia and my constituency. Mr. Speaker, I am thrilled of the development the country will experience, especially the projects to be undertaken in the south of the island, as those projects, Mr. Speaker, will benefit my constituency immensely. Mr. Speaker, we are making strides, and the economic output looks favorable for sustained growth. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for having me as part of his team of workers in building a new St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to thank my cabinet colleagues, the men and women on this side of the House, for their support and assistance in their respective designations. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the staff of the Department of Physical Planning, especially my Permanent Secretary and Deputy Permanent Secretary, and all heads of sections. Mr. Speaker, I thank immensely my colleague Minister in the cluster, the member for Babono, Minister Joseph, for his unwavering support and guidance, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward to our continued relationship in the development of this country. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my constituents of Soufrière-Font-Saint-Jacques for the love and support. And I look forward to the upcoming discussions with them in the coming weeks and months. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to thank the Soufrière Foundation, the Soufrière Constituency Council, the Soufrière Marine Management Association, SMMA, the schools, the business community, and all the other agencies within the constituency for their relentless effort in bringing the much needed change to the town. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you, colleagues, for your indulgence.
Honorable Prime Minister and member for Micwood South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that the House be suspended until tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Honorable members.
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker, I beg that the House be adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The House is adjourned.